Our story begins in a palace at the end of an afternoon, where someone was shouting, saying that, "Your Majesty could not do this." In a grand hall, the woman who was shouting claimed to be the Empress of the Empire. She said she was the mother of the people and the only imperial consort. The anguished woman asked the man how he could discard her like that. The nobleman was Alexander Lorenzi, the emperor of that realm. With a cold look, he asked Isabel to stop being so arrogant. After all, she had never been his only consort. Had she forgotten about Empress Sasha? She began to say that the girl was merely a consort. That declaration enraged the emperor, who said that she was completely deluded. With her red hair and green eyes, Isabel looked at him completely devastated. She began to cry even more, in denial of the tragedy that was happening. The emperor pulled his lover close, saying that Isabel could not even compare to Sasha. He said it was a pity that a woman like her was so greedy for the title of empress, to the point of coveting it just to keep him by her side. With long black hair and lilac eyes, she watched Isabel without saying a word. She hugged the man, avoiding the woman's gaze. Isabel watched the two of them walk away while tears fell from her eyes. The arrogant emperor said that Isabel was merely a decoration through which he took some power from Duke Blake, and revealed that he had never loved her, and that his love was reserved only for Sasha. The devastated woman sat on the floor, unable to believe the cruel words of her husband. Before they left completely, she asked him to wait. Alexander ignored her completely. She continued calling out to him in vain. A cell phone rang loudly. A young woman shouted because she was very outraged about something. The young woman was very upset by the emperor's words. After all, why couldn't Isabel simply dump him and live alone and happily? That story was called A Flower from Another World. It was a fantasy romance with a common storyline in which the protagonist became empress and tried to win the emperor's heart. But there was something the girl did not understand. Despite it being a loveless marriage, the emperor already had his empress. However, the female protagonist had the audacity to occupy the throne of the previous empress. The emperor was blinded by love for another woman and abandoned his legitimate wife. Because of that, Empress Isabel suffered in a cold room and was struck by illness while he enjoyed himself with his lover. Did the emperor regret it? The truth is that the emperor did not even look back, marrying his lover as soon as he got rid of his wife. The girl was shocked that such a bastard could exist. What had Isabel done so wrong to suffer like that? Could it have been her love for him? She looked at the clock, thinking about how long those characters would last in that story. Finally, she realized it was already 3 a.m., so she decided to just go to sleep. The girl had started a new project some time ago. The next day, she knew she needed to go to work earlier, but before sleeping, she had a thought. Someone in the palace called for the empress during tea. The person revealed to the red-haired woman that Your Majesty had granted her an audience. The environment she was in had old and colorful furniture. It was so spacious that she could even practice running. Even the servants were dressed elegantly. She barely recognized herself. With that appearance, she looked very different. Originally, she was a Korean university student who woke up one day in the kingdom of Castilla from the story A Flower from Another World. She became Isabel. At first, she thought she was dreaming and did her best to wake up. However, no matter what she did, she couldn't wake up. In the end, she had to accept that she wasn't dreaming, as she was taken care of by the palace maids. Now, living inside Isabel's body, the girl tries to calm herself down. She thinks that Isabel's past actions were regrettable, but that wasn't what she wanted to be. Would it be better to be a mistress? One of the maids says that she did a great job, wondering how much effort she must have made to meet the emperor. Isabel wonders if the emperor the girls are talking about is the male protagonist. To be honest, she didn't want to meet him at all. He was the one responsible for turning Isabel's life into a living hell. She asks the maids to wait for a few moments, and gently asks them to make her as beautiful as possible. The girls were very happy to hear that request. Isabel reflected for a few moments while the two talked among themselves. She realized that they truly wanted Isabel to be loved by the emperor. She felt a little bad about that, but decided to continue with her plan because she couldn't live someone else's life. Wearing elegant shoes and with a firm posture, she enters the emperor's chambers. She seemed distant, lost in her thoughts. Finally, she arrived at the emperor's study. He had made her wait for 2 weeks and finally summoned her to the study instead of taking her to the imperial bedroom or somewhere else. Maybe this way he would get straight to the point and let her leave. The emperor greets her without much ceremony and with little enthusiasm as well. He almost seemed surprised to receive her there. She widened her eyes when she saw him. He truly was a very attractive man, and for that reason must be the male protagonist. In an arrogant tone, he asked her why they were meeting. She throws the question back at him, asking if there should be a specific reason for a couple to meet, but he was not satisfied with that answer. The arrogant man asks her to sit down. Isabel has a theory that she needed to gather as much information as possible, since she had struggled her whole life to survive in an unfavorable environment. Before going to meet the emperor, she tried to analyze the situation to better understand the relationship relationship between Alexander, Isabel, and Sasha. Only 1 year and 6 months had passed since Sasha arrived at the imperial palace, which was the same period when the emperor began to show interest in her. He asks if she has changed her mind. With a graceful smile, Isabel reveals that she has changed her mind. She knew there was only one thing she could do before he trampled over her life. With a gleam of interest in his golden eyes, he asks what had changed. Triumphantly, Isabel asks the emperor to divorce her. With a surprised look, he asks the woman what she is talking about. He asks if she is aware of who is standing in front of her. That was not the place to make jokes. Isabel was disappointed by his response, already half expecting him to answer that way. During that time, Isabel had been doing all the palace duties without a single complaint, just to win the emperor's love. And even so, in the end, he chose Sasha. She tells him that she is not joking. Isabel explains that she thought about it for a long time and came to the conclusion that the title of empress was too much for her. Alexander listens to everything attentively. The lady explains that this was her final decision, and she hopes that he will understand her. He asks what she means by saying the title is too much for her. Hasn't she been fulfilling her duties as empress for 3 years already? And now all of a sudden she has changed her mind? Isabel says that she doesn't feel worthy of the title, and that she was not a suitable choice. Her gaze was hopeful. She hoped the emperor would realize that she was not joking with him. Alexander looked at her with contempt, as if her words deeply annoyed him. He asks if she was irritated because he hadn't visited her chambers for 2 weeks. That question surprised Isabel. The emperor explains that there was an invasion in the palace, and because of that he had to be away, and asks her to forgive him. Completely changing his tone of voice, he speaks sweetly, saying that in the future he will do everything to see her every day, claiming that he would try to be the perfect husband for her. She listens to everything with a certain disbelief, trying to remain calm since she already expected such a reaction. Isabel held her dress apprehensively, telling herself not to fall for the emperor's schemes. She knew of her tragic end and was not willing to go through that again. The young woman smiles as she states that the emperor would quickly find a woman more suitable to be his companion. She also tells him that she would have no problem at all being replaced by his consort. Then, Alexander asks her not to pay any attention to the consort. The emperor says that she is only living there for diplomatic reasons with the empire. Moreover, the girl arrived less than a year ago. He continues by saying that it would be difficult to replace a woman like Isabel, and for that reason, he gently asks once again that she should not worry too much. Isabel notices his gaze. She realizes how mistaken he was, thinking that she was acting purely out of jealousy, with a completely irrational promise. The empress reveals to him that her decision was not because of Sasha. While using a humble tone, she claims that she realized she did not deserve to occupy that position. The elegant woman hopes that he will understand. The cruel emperor looks at her as if he were trying to unravel her. Isabel hears him ask what she intends to do about Duke Blake. She reflects on what he said. Isabel's family, originally influential members of the aristocracy, lost their prestige and wealth over the years. And because of that, her father, Duke Blake, forced his daughter to marry the emperor. Although she did not know what was in that contract, she had lived her life happily. What kind of family treated their daughter like a piece in a political game? Our protagonist reveals that she knows imperial law requires the consent of both parties to proceed with a divorce, which in this case would be between her and the emperor, her husband. She apologizes if there is any misunderstanding in her information, but she was very astute and knew she was right. The emperor, annoyed by her words, states that this law was established because there had been very few divorces in the imperial lineage. He pauses for a few moments, weighing his words. Distressed by the discussion, he asks if she really wanted that divorce. If that were the case, he could not accept it. A sudden divorce like that was something he would never accept. He declares that she cannot simply abandon her position as empress, as it was not something replaceable. Analyzing the situation, Isabel finally understands why it is so difficult to obtain a divorce. He tries to postpone that conversation for a while. He claims that if she wants anything, he can gift it to her. Trying to negotiate strategically, he says that she may live however she wishes, but that the two of them would not divorce. The girl anxiously fiddles with her dress, asking what he meant by that. The man asks whether he had the right to lie to her, if he was the emperor of Castilla and she the empress. With a slight mocking tone, she asks whether, as empress, she could do anything except ask for a divorce. He agrees, saying that she could not deny it. Isabel gives a satisfied smile. With an elegant bow, she wishes glory to the sun that never sets, as was customary to say to the emperor. That was enough, but how could she be satisfied if she had only taken a single glass of wine? She turns to leave, leaving the emperor alone in his study. If he did not want to divorce, she would make it happen at all costs. Now, it was time to resume her plans. Suddenly, someone arrives in the palace corridor. Isabel stops to see who it was. With long black hair and light-colored eyes, that innocent appearance no longer deceived her. That young woman was Sasha, the emperor's concubine. The two women stare at each other for a few moments. Apparently, she was going to speak with the emperor without an appointment. Despite her delicate appearance, Sasha was a treacherous woman who wandered around the palace. Isabel decides to ignore her and continue on her way, but Sasha strikes up a conversation, saying that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. Our protagonist was not liking that empty chatter at all. To have become a consort, she must have received etiquette lessons, but instead of using them, she addressed the empress without any courtesy whatsoever. Isabel asks her what the consort was doing in that place. With a smile, Sasha says that she had gone to see the emperor. At first, she had gone to look for him in his bedroom, but since he was not there, she went to his study. The red-haired woman could not believe that the girl had simply gone to the emperor's bedroom as if it were nothing. Our protagonist decides to end the conversation, explaining that she had some things to take care of and turns to leave. Sasha asks her to wait a little. Isabel asks what she wanted. Sasha says that there is something she has wanted to talk to her about for quite some time already. Our protagonist hears the girl say that she thinks the two of them should be close, sharing their worries and secrets. Things like that. What she really meant was that she wanted the two of them to talk honestly. Sasha asks whether what Isabel did was a tactical move to get the emperor's attention. The two women remain silent for a while. When our protagonist read the story for the first time, she judged the consort to be innocent and foolish. But now, it didn't really seem that way, because Sasha was treating her as competition. However, our clever protagonist smiled because she had a few cards up her sleeve. All of this was far too childish for her. Sasha seemed too innocent to anticipate Isabel's moves. The girl asks why she is laughing. Had she said something funny? Isabel says that she truly found all of that very funny, especially seeing Sasha struggle so much for nothing. And then, didn't she agree? Sasha seemed deeply shaken by the empress's words. Holding back her tears, the girl asks, how so was she struggling for nothing? Isabel says that Sasha could have him all to herself, and turns to leave. With a triumphant posture, our protagonist declares to the innocent girl that she has no interest in the emperor. Isabel knows very well that she doesn't care if the two of them act like soulmates in the future, as long as they leave her out of that drama. To save her life in that story, she decided to become the villain. Since Alexander had said that she could do whatever she wanted, she decided to go on a shopping spree using the empire's money and live a fabulous life. Isabel was very satisfied with her plan. She was not even a little willing to go back to her old life. Since she was there, she might as well enjoy that life for a long time. A new day begins in the imperial palace. Servants carry boxes. Some maids organize a few items. Sasha asks everyone what that all meant. The girl was quite irritated and asked Isabel what she thought she was doing. Our protagonist tells her that she was moving since the Empress's palace was being built at that moment. Sasha asks why that move was necessary. She questions Isabel about why she was moving into her palace, of all places. She lets out a satisfied laugh. That had been the first thing she chose ever since she decided to become the villain of the story. She would move into the consort palace, which was where Sasha was temporarily living. Isabel's original palace was large and filled with exquisite furniture. However, it was still tiny compared to the palace the emperor had gifted Sasha. When the emperor began to neglect Isabel, the servants also rejected her, leaving the palace so poorly maintained that a stream of icy wind could pass through the place. But for various reasons, Isabel was not able to fix that problem and ended up contracting tuberculosis. No matter how much Sasha pretended to be naive, the consort palace was full of expensive items the emperor had bought for her. Isabel didn't know when she would be able to divorce the emperor, so her plan was to renovate the empress's palace and decorate it her own way, even if it took some time. That was also why she chose to live in a place that wasn't a construction zone. The other palaces were very far away, and there were many rooms in the consort palace. So, what was the problem with sharing a little? Isabel sarcastically suggests whether Sasha wouldn't like to use the Empress's palace for a while. She says it is very airy and the interior design is quite minimalist. She would probably like it a lot. Sasha was left speechless. Like a shameless villain, Isabel also suggests that Sasha could use the other palaces if she wanted to. The girl says fiercely that that was her palace. Why would she abandon something that belonged to her in favor of Isabel? Our protagonist was satisfied to see the young woman so upset. Since she didn't want to leave, Isabel says that the two of them would live together for some time. The red-haired woman hopes that the two of them will get along very well. After all, what could possibly go wrong with that arrangement, right? From her gaze, it was clear that Sasha was deeply enraged by the Empress's audacity. Clenching her fist tightly, she says that she was worried about Isabel. She reveals that she knew how much the Empress hated her. And then, making an innocent little face, she asks whether the Emperor would be okay with that change. Isabel seemed completely unbothered by that question. She lets out a laugh, thinking about how hard Sasha was trying to appear kind, when what she really wanted was to gossip about Isabel to the Emperor. Isabel asks whether Sasha was really worried about her. Our protagonist thanks the young woman's sudden concern with great irony, which ends up hurting the consort quite deeply. Isabel thinks that, judging by the expression on Sasha's face, she was going straight to tell everything to the Emperor that same afternoon. She was calmly having tea in her chambers. Out of nowhere, Alexander bursts the doors open furiously. She lets out a sigh and thinks it was about time. He approaches her, saying that Sasha told him something he couldn't believe. Was it true that she was moving to the consort palace? The Emperor says that she already had the Empress's palace, and that her attempt to take Sasha's palace was completely unnecessary. Isabel reminds him that he had said she could do whatever she wanted. He became furious upon hearing that. Our protagonist says that she simply followed his commands and did whatever she pleased. On top of that, she told Sasha that she could stay in the Empress's palace, but the girl refused the generous offer. Alexander says that she was being ridiculous. He claims that he could build her an even larger and more sophisticated palace. So what was the reason for taking something that belonged to someone else? Isabel lets out a small sigh. She reveals to him that she doesn't want to know about any other place. Only the consort palace interests her. He looks at her apprehensively. The woman argues that it was none other than him, Your Majesty, who said that she could do whatever she wanted. Alexander and Isabel stare at each other for a few moments. His gaze was impetuous and unshakable. She, on the other hand, seemed deeply satisfied with her strategy and wore a smirk. Defeated, he says that she may do as she wishes. Alexander lets out a sigh and says that he never imagined she would be as stubborn as a mule. Our protagonist was radiant, but deep down, she knew that this did not mean he would divorce her, but that he would endure her doing even the most ridiculous things to keep up appearances. This could be good for her. Making a courtesy to the Emperor, she thanks him, saying that he made a wise decision. Alexander says that it will be challenging for her to share a palace with someone. He asks her to try not to cause any unnecessary trouble that could ruin the imperial family's reputation. Isabel listens as he comments that he will try to convince Sasha somehow. With a dangerous smile, she says that she can't promise him anything, and then she declares that everything will depend on the consort's attitude toward her. Isabel knew very well that Sasha would not stay silent after things had gone so far. A new day begins. In an inner garden, the birds were singing. Isabel walked with her ladies-in-waiting. The main character was deep in thought. After all, the peace and silence in the palace were far more intense than she had imagined. That was far too suspicious to her. Even though her stay there was temporary, Isabel had no intention of remaining idle. She ordered the servants to take her boxes to their respective rooms. Isabel was determined to feel at home, so she filled all the rooms with her belongings, and because of that, she took over almost all the spaces. Because of this, she was occupying more than 70% of the consort palace. And even so, Sasha still had not appeared to complain. She then thought that the Emperor must have comforted Sasha very well. Despite the consort palace being immense, she constantly ran into the consort. Isabel noticed that every time, instead of confronting her, Sasha ignored her completely. From the young woman's expression, she clearly felt wronged. But apparently the Emperor had ordered her to keep quiet. Isabel definitely did not want to meddle between the two of them, so her strategy was to make Sasha start a fight with her. But the young woman would not give her any opportunity to cause the divorce. Was the Emperor trying to tell her that he would not divorce her no matter what happened? That was exhausting. According to the original story, Isabel was just a supporting character who existed only to be compared to Sasha. Our protagonist knows that soon she would be treated like trash. The girl knew very well that she would not simply accept all that suffering, and because of that, she wanted to leave as soon as possible. Isabel had to outdo herself and do something even more terrible. She decides to call her maids. She decided that it was time to make a new dress and that they should summon all the tailors of the Empire. After all, being extravagant was part of her role as the villain. During the afternoon in the palace, there was a murmur of people. Several tailors and designers carried rolls of fabric back and forth. Meanwhile, Isabel, wearing her robe, watched them. Apparently, all the most famous professionals of the Empire had been summoned. That was unbelievable. One of them comments that he had heard that the Empress had burned and buried all of her old clothes and jewelry. Another man said that she had donated other inferior pieces to her maids. So, because of that, all the tailors and designers had been summoned to create a brand new wardrobe and accessories from scratch for her. One of them asked what she thought of that dress design. He hands her a book containing one of his exclusive designs, claiming that the model would suit her red hair very well. The man gently suggests that she take a look at the catalog. Isabel seemed very satisfied. She realized how first-rate designers were truly different. Those dresses were very expensive and elegant. Our protagonist realized that she had never had the chance to wear such elegant dresses before. In her past life, her parents had forced her to share expenses with them to pay for her brother's studies. She was truly exhausted from that suffering. Her parents constantly threw it in her face that she had attended the university she wanted, but her brother hadn't had the same chance. She couldn't take it anymore. In a burst of emotion, the protagonist revealed to her parents that from then on, she would live only for herself. Her parents were shocked. She wanted at all costs to escape that torment, even though for a time she had sent most of her money to help her parents. Remembering the past, Isabel felt a little sad. Because of her previous life, she sympathized greatly with the character in the book. She thought as she flipped through the pages of the catalog. She and Isabel were very different, because while in her real life, the girl whose real name was Jane struggled to buy even cheap clothes, Isabel was covered in jewelry and expensive dresses. Despite being in the Empress's body, she still felt that she should kneel and give thanks for the fabulous dresses. But the girl knew she had to maintain that facade, because if she showed she wasn't accustomed to expensive things, it could raise some suspicions. The tailor asks her what she thought of the dresses. His creations were unique throughout the empire. However, her reaction took the man completely by surprise. He told her that she had very good taste. Despite not feeling comfortable playing that role, Isabel had to make an effort to leave there safely, and she tossed the catalog away. She gave a big, malicious smile. With the purest arrogance, she asks him, "Who else, besides you, would make such horrible clothes?" He was completely speechless. Isabel says that if she went out on the streets wearing those crude garments, she would become a laughingstock in the empire. While crossing her legs on the sofa, she says that she hopes he didn't come there to present her with those rags. Then, the Empress asks if he had other, more expensive dresses to present to her. The tailor was still shocked by her rude words. Finally, Isabel asks if he would like to show her something else. Feeling exhausted, the man explains that he hadn't produced anything else yet. He offers to present something in 2 months, but the Empress aggressively asks if he expects her to wear a robe for 2 months. Now she was furious, and orders the tailor not to lie to ensure his safety, because she discovered that Sasha would visit him the following week. Most noble clothing was made to measure, and once chosen, those designs were not sewn for other people. If there was one thing the nobility hated, it was wearing clothes that had already been seen on someone else. Thus, each design had to be unique. At that moment, among the nobility of the entire empire, the young consort Sasha was famous as a client with special status. The man tried to justify himself by saying that those designs were more compatible with the concubine Sasha. Isabel noticed that from the tailor's long justification, those models apparently had not been reserved by her. She realized that he was lying. So for how long had Isabel allowed that to happen to her? She then says that he was a very arrogant man and orders him to bring the designs to her immediately. He was terrified. With a wave of her hand, Isabel says that apparently he was incapable of understanding how much the Empress was superior and had more power than a mere consort. To demonstrate her power, the Empress's guards advanced toward the tailor. Trying to save himself, the man explains that he can ask his assistants to bring the designs immediately. Sometime later, Isabel chose the outfits from the catalog. He asks her which of the 14 designs she liked the most. She replies that she wants all of them. The tailor didn't seem to understand very well. She says that she hates being repetitive and hands the paper back to him. Then, once again, she says that she wants all the designs. Since she was already going to spend a lot of money anyway, she might as well buy all the dresses so she could secretly sell them after the divorce and have her own money. Far away from there, in the Emperor's elegant palace, someone was shouting that this was an absurdity. A man asked His Majesty if he had any idea how much money the Empress had spent on dresses and jewelry this time. At the table, the men seemed very agitated as they discussed her expenses. One of them criticized her attitude, saying it was an exaggeration even if it were to maintain appearances, and that those purchases had cost an entire day's worth of the Empire's defense budget. Alexander listened to all of this in silence. The elegant man seemed very annoyed by those comments. Another man said that he wished to be honest, as he was a loyal subject. Although the current Empress, Isabel of Castilla, was excellent at what she did, Alexander could not let this pass. The Emperor insistently tapped his fingers on the table. Yet another spoke up, saying that her extravagant habits did not match the seriousness of her royal title. One of the men maliciously said that the consort Sasha was a fantastic candidate to replace the current Empress. Alexander drummed his fingers impatiently. Suddenly, the Emperor asked all the men if they had already said everything they wanted to say. He commented that he had been waiting for them to finish, but they seemed like wild horses that did not know when to stop. The Emperor reminded them of a passage from a poem that spoke of how the splendor of Castilla was comparable to the legendary empire of Icarus, and that all that splendor could never be bought with all the gold that filled Lake Nixos. Even though civilization might one day fade away, the empire would be eternal. One of the men seemed tormented upon hearing fragments of the poem. Alexander reminded them that the empire had as much gold as Lake Nixos. Did they really think that a few dresses would impact the imperial treasury? He was Alexander Lorenzi II. He was the empire incarnate, and the prestige of the empire was his prestige. Which of them would dare to question his authority there? The men felt embarrassed when they heard the noble ask whether Isabel's competence had not earned her a few dresses. He had gathered the the most talented people in the empire there, and apparently none of them were capable of knowing what was truly important. Alexander chose Isabel as his empress. He called for the Minister of Finance, who shrank back nervously, and asked whether he was questioning the emperor's decision. The man tried to respond, asking how someone like him could ever doubt the decisions of His Majesty. He tried to justify himself by saying that he had expressed himself poorly, as he was worried about the interests of the empire. Alexander impetuously said that the minister did not seem to know his place, since he had remained in a position he did not deserve for far too long. Then, the emperor decided to give him the position he truly deserved now. Orders were given, and the Minister of Finance was immediately removed from his post and was to be confined to his mansion for 3 months. The minister begged for mercy as he was dragged away by the guards. Alexander realized that he had almost forgotten a detail. The empress's prestige was also his prestige, so he would never allow her to dress in rags that did not impact the empire's finances in any way. The Minister of Defense seemed confused by his words. Then, he tried to please the emperor by saying that he agreed with him, as the empress deserved to wear nothing less luxurious than that. Alexander laughed because he knew the man would agree with him. The emperor asked if everyone agreed that the empress should dress luxuriously, correct? With a wave of his hand, he ordered his secretary to have a dress made 10 times more luxurious and refined than her last commission. The secretary stated that he would do as the emperor wished. With a determined look, Alexander told the men that it was time to resume the meeting. In the corridor, the men spoke about the dismissal of Minister Earl Claxton. Alexander commented that it had been faster than he expected. The emperor spoke with his secretary, revealing that because the minister had helped with the maintenance of the throne, he had been given a position greater than his status. But he was very greedy and kept trying to obtain other privileges like a leech. The noble had considered the possibility of getting rid of him, but fortunately managed to find a plausible excuse. The secretary commented that if the emperor punished him like a noble, he would be severely reprimanded. The emperor commented to him about how people truly did not know their place, and how human greed had no limits. The noble paused for a few moments. Alexander asked the secretary what he was trying to tell him, and he replied that it would be difficult for the common people to consider him a lucid emperor if he continued to make such incorrect judgments, no matter how great his achievements were. In response, the emperor said that the secretary still seemed not to have understood one detail. According to his words, Alexander's time on the throne was still very short, and he was still in the phase of expanding the empire's power. Therefore, Alexander saw himself as determined to rule through fear. He revealed to the secretary that he intended to eliminate abnormalities, rule with severity, and dispose of things without mercy. All of that was part of his tactics. Those were the only things he had learned from his father. Turning to leave, he asked the secretary whether he would have eliminated his father if he cared about being a lucid emperor. The secretary had no answer to that. He remembered well that it had been 3 years since Alexander ended the life of the previous emperor and ascended the throne. Although that change had pacified some conflicts with barbarians on the northern border and strengthened the empire's power, many people still used the excuse that, because they were young, they wanted to fight with their minds. However, Alexander was not the type to hide or give in, ready to run over his rivals for satisfaction. The secretary knew that ordering that dress for the empress was also a warning. He walked on, reflecting that his work would increase day after day. He was also unsure of what the empress would think of it. He only hoped that she would not view it negatively. A new day begins in the palace. A butler carries a large gift. More and more gifts arrive. While holding a dress, Isabel looks in surprise at so many gift boxes. Our protagonist was very fascinated by the presents. Isabel was impressed by the precious stones embedded in the dress. She noticed that the golden fabric had some golden threads, something she had never seen since she was born. She was amazed at how the garment remained light despite the many layers of fabric. The butler told her that Alexander had sent her a gift. She thought he would simply give her something luxurious, but it was actually a magnificent dress. The man explained to her that it was a gift commissioned with great affection by the emperor, saying that it cost the value of a palace. Isabel was shocked by the value of the dress. If she spilled a drop of sweat on it, she would never forgive herself. She decided to ask when Alexander had decided to send her that gift. The butler hands her a letter written by the emperor himself. Our protagonist reads the letter, which said that he was not sure whether such a dress would suit her beautiful eyes, but that the next time they met, he hoped she would be wearing that gift. She was completely confused. The girl was very confused, trying to understand what his intentions were. She remembered that Alexander originally did not care about Isabel at all. Or did he? One of the maids comments that the dress was truly wonderful. No one had ever seen anything as beautiful as that design. The girl congratulates the empress on obtaining something so splendid. In an inappropriate manner, she continues talking about the sincerity of the empress's heart reaching the emperor's heart. Isabel was left speechless upon hearing that. One of the maids scolds the young woman, saying that she had been inappropriate. The girl apologizes for the intrusion. Isabel says that it is all right. She realized that the girls were happy as if that story were their own. Isabel did not hate that girl at all. In her memories, she knew that the young woman had been loyal to her throughout the entire time they were together in the palace. On the contrary, the Empress liked her quite a lot, but regarding the other maids, Isabel was not quite sure what she wanted. She thought that she would understand everything later. Our protagonist decided to focus on something much more important, which was the value of that dress. According to the Emperor, that blue dress cost the value of a palace. In her previous life, she was crazy about shopping, but the standards of an emperor were truly different, and Isabel would have to make a great effort to exaggerate in luxuries. Apparently, he did not show off much because he had a lot of money to spend. Or perhaps it was because of the divorce request that he was being so generous with her. Would he really hate divorcing her that much? One of the maids approaches, suggesting that Isabel try on the dress to see how it looks and offering to help her. However, Isabel does not wish to wear it so soon. Turning to leave, she states that she will not wear it, and triumphantly declares that she cannot simply accept a grand gift from a man she intends to separate from, so they should throw the dress into her wardrobe. A conductor leads the orchestra. Elegant guests chat cheerfully. At the table, a wonderful dinner was being served. Wearing elegant shoes and a splendid dress, Isabel enters the hall. Her red hair was tied up in a bun, and her green eyes were fascinating. That party took place every Friday, and all members of the royal family and their servants attended. Despite being something established since the third king, how were they able to afford a party of that magnitude every week? It was probably to flaunt their wealth. In any case, Isabel planned everything very well. Such a refined event used resources very well and did not diminish the dignity of the royal family. Isabel was very satisfied with how the event was unfolding, as it was something not everyone would be capable of envisioning. As she delicately swirled a glass of wine, someone approached and praised the party. She noticed who was speaking to her. It was Count Barkley, who looked at her with a strange gaze and a malicious smile. He was a less important character who had appeared since the beginning of the story. The man was an active supporter of Sasha, who wanted her to gain the title of Empress. Isabel thinks, "What an ugly mustache." The Count was so startled by her attitude that he was left speechless. He asked her what the problem was. With a smile, Isabel tells him that it was already time to get rid of that hypocrisy. The woman asks if he liked what she had said. He couldn't understand that conversation at all. He says that he was only trying to sincerely praise her hard work in organizing that event. Challengingly, Isabel asks him if his gratitude had taken 3 years to appear. What a surprise. Count Barkley was shocked by her audacity. She turns to leave, thinking that if he were truly grateful, he would have expressed it much earlier and would not be trying to cling to her only now. The person who was supposedly meant to hear those false compliments no longer existed. The former Isabel, well, she thought that now was not the time to worry about matters of the past. As she walks through the Golden Hall, Isabel begins to plan. Alexander was there as well. The Emperor was wearing a very elegant and ornate imperial outfit. Isabel notices his arrival, and truly, he was the most handsome man of all, also known as a man who appears only once every 100 years. When she read the original story, she thought it was something cheesy, but it was the truth. Isabel was a little surprised to see him there. In the adjacent hall, the Empress stared at the man, and he stared back at her. Alexander looked at her without saying anything, and she couldn't think of anything to say to him. Suddenly, someone approaches, interrupting the moment between the two of them. Her long black hair fluttered. Sasha, wearing a long, ornate cream-colored dress, calls the Emperor by his name. In the hall, the other guests were shocked by how the consort dared to call the Emperor while ignoring his royal title. She was reprimanded by the secretary. The girl tries to explain that she was so happy that it came out naturally. Alexander looks at her with a certain indifference. Grabbing him by the arm, Sasha says that she missed him very much. Seeing all of that, Isabel thinks that the whole act was a bit too much for a public space, but the other guests seemed to ignore it, as they saw her as a heroine despite everything. Sasha displayed an innocent look. Isabel noticed something. As the Emperor and his consort walked away, the girl told him that even if they saw each other every day, she would still miss him. Sasha took the opportunity to tell him that she had spent a long time waiting for that party simply to be with the Emperor. Alexander rudely says that the event happened every week, so what was the reason for such high expectations? Isabel listens in surprise as Sasha says that every week was interesting, because it was where the entire imperial family gathered. She wonders what she meant by calling them family. The Emperor asks her to pay attention to the words spoken there. She apologizes, saying that she spoke without thinking. Isabel wonders what kind of shallow provocation that was. How could the Isabel from the story have been so hurt by that? Sasha looks around with that usual innocent air. Our protagonist thought that it didn't matter whether the two truly loved each other or not because she was not the real Isabel, so there was no way for her to be hurt. It would be a shame to pay attention to such basic tricks, and in any case, she had another purpose for attending that party. Isabel delicately swirls her wine in the glass. In front of her stood Marquis Wilhelm, who seemed a little frightened. The wine spills. Isabel throws her wine onto the Marquis, who is caught by surprise. Very startled, the guests watch all of it. The woman gives a satisfied smile. With a smug smile, she apologizes for the incident, saying that her hands were very slippery. The wine was completely spilled. All the guests were completely shocked. Even Sasha was frightened, hiding behind the Emperor. Isabel tells the Marquis that she hadn't realized how slippery her hand was. The tormented man says that she deliberately spilled everything on him. She says that she has already apologized and asks what more he wants from her. Isabel keeps insisting that her hand really did slip, but he was not convinced. She says that it will happen again, and she delivers a hard slap to the Marquis. He felt the force of her hand. Isabel had a deep hatred for that old man. How dare he touch one of her girls when he was a married man with children? A few nights earlier, our protagonist remembers hearing fragments of a conversation among the maids. She approaches to better understand what was going on. One of the maids was comforting a friend who was crying and saying that a man kept sending her insistent letters and even showed up at her house. The young woman was so afraid that she feared Marquis Wilhelm might be waiting for her when she went out to work. Isabel immediately recognized his name. The girls were talking, and one of them said there were rumors that he chose young girls and touched them. Another commented that one of the Marquis's daughters had married into a poor family, as if he wanted to get rid of her. One of them commented that she was very afraid because he was a very powerful man. Isabel hears the girl say that she was afraid she wouldn't be able to stop him, so perhaps she would need to resign and even move house. Our protagonist became very angry, thinking that that old man was old enough to be the girl's grandfather. Isabel was furious at his audacity. She would already be angry if something so terrible happened to anyone, but it was even more revolting because it had happened to a girl who was so loyal to her. She lifted her head, taking a deep breath, and hoped that the young woman would not worry. Our protagonist was determined to take action. Back in the present, Isabel's hand moves quickly. She slaps the Marquis once more. The guests were very frightened, wondering if someone should stop her. Sasha still did not understand what was happening. In the Golden Hall, some began to reprimand the Empress. Isabel didn't care at all and continued slapping the Marquis, because to her that was the quickest revenge she could obtain. Despite the reprimands, no one there had the courage to stop her from doing that, except for one person. Sasha watched as Alexander stepped forward. The Emperor shouts at her, calling her by name. She smiles with satisfaction, having caused the reaction she expected. Isabel says that she wasn't finished yet and that there was still one more thing. The Empress, in all her glory, delivers a strong kick between the Marquis's legs. Everyone was very shocked at how everything escalated so quickly. The Marquis finally felt the pain of the consequences of his actions. The man finally fell to the ground, knocked out by her kick. She looked at him with deep contempt in her eyes. Isabel thought that it was better to do what she could with the resources she had. She turns upon hearing Alexander calling her. Our protagonist felt a little afraid when she saw him so close to her. Alexander wore a very severe look. She remained silent for a few moments, waiting for his reaction. With a defiant posture, she asks what the problem was. The Emperor seemed to be in a bad mood. He was very enraged that she had caused such damage during the banquet. Quickly, Alexander grabbed her arm. Isabel begins to speak to him. She thought that she was determined to cause a scene in a public place to encourage him to ask for a divorce, avoiding future embarrassments for him. Perhaps it was strange for her to do something that might benefit someone like Sasha, but she couldn't help it. She intended to follow the wishes of her heart, and soon Alexander would make her disappear. His gaze was furious. Then he says that she caused a huge mess. Isabel was confused. Had he gone mad? Alexander was a very attractive man, despite his temper. She couldn't understand what tactic he was using. The Emperor let out a sigh, and she was still confused. He told her that such behavior was inadmissible. Alexander looked at her hand, which was reddened after delivering so many slaps to the Marquis. Turning to the side, he asked for the royal physician to be called to treat the Empress's hand. Was she the only one confused by his change in attitude? Well, apparently not. She approaches Alexander. In an ironic tone, Isabel says that the one who must be needing the imperial physician is Marquis Wilhelm, since he was unconscious on the floor. The Emperor tells her to feel free. Sometime later, in another part of the palace, far from the guests, the royal physician examines Isabel's hand, and she feels that Alexander was protecting her. After examining the Empress's hand, the physician explains that everything was fine, as her hand was only reddened. Isabel remembered that Alexander did not reprimand her in public. The Emperor asks the physician to give her the best possible treatment. Isabel wonders what he might be thinking by doing that. He seemed very annoyed with her. And suddenly, he gives her an affectionate smile. She averts her gaze so as not to feel attracted to the emperor. She wondered what kind of smile that was on his face. On the other side of the palace, some guests were talking about some golden threads in the palace, and some others were asking what had happened between them, since for some time the emperor had only cared about the consort. What could have caused such a drastic reaction from the empress? She knew she looked like a hateful woman in the eyes of others. Alexander says they may go to the imperial dinner if the physician has already finished treating her. The noble turns to her and gives her a charming wink. Isabel is very confused by the emperor's change in attitude. They proceed to the great golden hall. He begins to take off his coat and places it over Isabel's shoulders as a protective gesture. Isabel discreetly showed that she liked that gesture. She looks at those who were still present there. In the background, behind the guests, Sasha seemed desolate. The consort was clearly very upset. Our protagonist realized how affected Sasha was by that. She also noticed how people were still commenting on what had happened. She imagined that surely the next day the newspapers would be talking about her relationship with the emperor. Had he changed toward her to try to dissuade public opinion about the possible divorce? That was a bit compromising. Alexander explains to the guests that he had not prepared anything very formal, but that he hoped they would enjoy it. That moment was not meant for official business, but rather a place for exchanges among officials from each palace. He wished that no one would feel pressured into anything. Isabel thinks it was an exaggeration to say that nothing had been prepared. If an event of that size was prepared every Friday, what must an annual event be like? Even the simplest foods were very elaborate. She lets out a sigh, thinking that at least she should eat to have energy to carry on with her wicked plans. Alexander approaches and asks the empress to serve herself, since she had used a lot of strength a short while ago. She laughs a little awkwardly. Out of nowhere, Sasha compliments Isabel's dress. Trying to strike up a conversation, the girl asks whether that dress was from boutique Charlotte Collins. Sasha says she heard that the Empress bought 14 designs there, and as expected, the models were fabulous and suited Isabel very well. For her, a simpler model would be enough. Our protagonist tries to understand why the consort was trying so hard to seem modest, until she realizes that it was a very effective strategy. She remembers that in the original story, Sasha was seen as a poor girl who rose quickly, and there was an episode with a noble lady who had a mink stole. Pretending to be a modest girl, Sasha says she would never buy something so expensive, and would be content with squirrel or rabbit fur because she found everything too extravagant. The lady was very embarrassed by her words. However, that made the men admire Sasha even more. Isabel thinks that before she might not have noticed that strategy, but it was certainly intentional. Had the consort forgotten that she had already bragged about being close to the owner of the dress boutique? Speaking of dresses, Alexander diverted his attention from Sasha, and turning to Isabel, he asked the Empress why she was not wearing the dress he had given her. He asked whether that was not enough for her. During the dinner, Isabel wonders why he was speaking to her like that. She refused to nurture a relationship with him. The guests were beginning to grow tense again, thinking that the Emperor and the Empress were at odds. Isabel thinks that there will always be public opinions, no matter what she does. Adopting another strategy, she tells him that his nobility does not match those clothes. She tells him that she would rather receive a city or a castle. The guests were astonished by her words. She lets out a sigh, thinking that since he was the emperor, that was not asking too much. But perhaps her plans were not going as she expected. Alexander smiles at her. He asks whether what she wants is just a city. Taking her hand, the emperor says that would not be enough. Looking at her with affection, Alexander says that even if he conquered another empire, she would never be replaced. He reminds her that she is the pillar of that empire, and his only empress. Isabel was deeply shocked. Had he eaten something spoiled? Her plans were only to get her money and a divorce, not to take all the empire's investments. It would make no sense if he continued giving her extravagant things. She wonders what she would do if he gifted her a dress worth the value of a city. Interrupting the conversation, Sasha tells the emperor that she wouldn't mind if he never gave her an expensive dress, saying that she only wanted silk and linen dresses. The two nobles hear the consort say that people's values do not change according to their clothes. She says that the only condition was that the emperor would remain by her side for her entire life. That would be enough for her. The guests listened as the young woman said that even though she had no treasure, he treated her as if she were a treasure. Isabel was left speechless. The truth is that our protagonist found all of that very sudden and without reason. She regarded Sasha as a young woman who was quite intelligent. Had she become insecure upon seeing Alexander give attention to Isabel? Alexander rudely asks Sasha what she is talking about. Putting the consort in her place, the emperor says that she had no treasure. So what did that mean? He tells the girl that he gave her an amount appropriate to her position as imperial consort. Nothing more than that. Sasha was deeply shaken by that blunt response. He asks her how she could fulfill her responsibilities to the people without understanding what she possessed. To him, modesty and humility were not the only virtues of the imperial family. Isabel remains silent while the two argue. Sasha seemed devastated by the Emperor's speech. He asks her if she understood what he meant. The young woman replies that she will remember that in the future. Isabel lets out a sigh, thinking that despite the reprimand, Sasha would behave the same way again soon. By the way, in the original book, would Alexander ever have spoken to her like that? In her memories, there was nothing like that. Judging by the atmosphere of the dinner, she did not seem to be the only one surprised, as the guests were also uncomfortable with that conversation. Isabel no longer knew what to expect. She remembered very clearly that the character had been cruelly abandoned by the Emperor and his consort. At last, the protagonist decides to eat something. To Alexander, Sasha's words must have been a huge exaggeration. She finds herself thinking about what happened, having seen him speak about the obligations of the nobility, because Isabel saw him as just another authoritarian emperor. Alexander asks the guests if anyone would like to join him for a drink. After several guests offered to have a glass of wine with him, Isabel thought that he was capable of creating a new atmosphere for that dinner. With a gleam in her eyes, she was determined not to lose. She decided to behave so badly during the dinner that they would grow tired of her. Isabel complains about several things during the dinner, even ordering the servants to remove all the fish bones. In addition, she asked for the steaks to be grilled and the tomatoes to be peeled before being served, because she could not digest tomato skin. Some guests comment on how difficult the Empress's temperament is because she used to be gentle and calm. She hears the men commenting on how the former Isabel was benevolent and merciful, but something had made her change drastically. The same men also gossip about the imperial consort who, besides being sweet, was completely submissive to the Emperor. Isabel becomes annoyed hearing those foolish comments about herself and Sasha, but decides to focus on the food, which was much better. The Empress knows that she should be 100% committed to the role of villain. In silence, Alexander takes a sip of his drink. Suddenly, something catches the Emperor's attention. What could it be? After that party, nothing much happened for some time, until Isabel received an invitation. She noticed that it was a letter from Duchess Salinger. That was the first time Isabel had heard that name, as she did not remember seeing it in the book. Why would she send her an invitation? There was nothing about that Duchess in Isabel's papers, so they were probably not relatives. Could she be a friend? Some kind of mysterious ally? Since in the original story Isabel was a secondary character, it wouldn't be strange if a friend didn't appear. If Duchess Salinger really was Isabel's friend, it would be strange for her to refuse that invitation. Even so, her personality had changed drastically after several events. If she ignored her friend, she could be considered insane. And in an empire like that, people of that sort found their fate at a stake. Her only purpose was to obtain a divorce, not to end up amid flames, so Isabel decides to be even more cautious. Our protagonist was curious to know why she had been invited, so she decides that it would be better to take a walk than to stay in her room. Although divorce was her main goal, if she was going to spend some time living there, she needed to gather more information. She knew that there was more information than the maids could reveal to her, or that was written in the books in the library. Isabel reflects that a tea party with other ladies would be a great place to gather the information she wanted. But even so, how would she accept that invitation? At the Salinger Palace, many elegant ladies walked about in their ball gowns. Many refined young women paraded in their outfits. Others chatted with friends about the latest events. At the center, Duchess Salinger greets the guest of honor of that afternoon, the Empress Isabel of Castilla. That was the first time our protagonist encountered people from outside the palace, aside from the designers. Judging by the Duchess's title and her age, she seemed to be the most influential figure there, so it would be crucial for Isabel to remain cautious. Isabel reflected, trying to understand whether Salinger was a friend or an enemy, and she heard some girls praising her dress. Some of them said how much the wine color highlighted her red hair and fair skin. Distracted, our protagonist wonders who is still yet to arrive. She hears a nearby laugh. At her side, Duchess Salinger commented that the Empress's dress was truly luxurious. She gives an enigmatic smile. Now it was time to know the truth. Apparently, the Duchess and she did not have a friendly relationship. Among the nobility of the empire, talking about money was considered vulgar. Because of that, even at a grand party, it was considered taboo to talk about money. The same applied to inconvenient questions about how much certain things cost. And the Duchess's comment about her dress being too luxurious was not a compliment, but an insult. With a contemptuous laugh, Duchess Salinger repeats that the dress was very luxurious, but only the dress. Isabel cannot accept that situation. To her, there was no way a lady of that age had not learned basic etiquette. Even if the empire was a place where power was far more important, and even if her family was a ruined lineage with only a name left, why was there no one there who respected Isabel? She assumes that the Duchess must have seen her as a peasant who would never be able to fit in among the nobility. But Isabel was no longer the same as before. Opening her large fan, she wonders if the Duchess thought she would simply accept those insults. Isabel reveals that her dress was from Boutique Winston, leaving the woman confused. Showing off her beautiful dress, she comments that there were many fabulous designs there for her. All the Empress needed to do was choose. Then she accused the Duchess of also buying very luxurious dresses at the same place. Quickly, the older woman stands up, fleeing the discussion, and Isabel smiles triumphantly. And that was how she made the Duchess taste her own poison. Our protagonist immediately noticed that she was wearing a dress from the same boutique. If things continued that way, the woman would not be able to keep up appearances. If she did not want to be challenged, then she should not start a fight. In any case, there were 2 empty seats. If one was hers, whose would the other be? And finally, she arrives. Isabel watched the guests greeting the imperial consort. Sasha appeared wearing a delicate cream dress with embroidery. She asked the other girls to sit down. Our protagonist grew pensive as Sasha's presence there would change her plans. Then she gives a smug smile. Approaching the Empress, Sasha says that it is wonderful to see her there. The girl gives her a friendly smile. Isabel realized what was happening. All those people gathered there were deliberately ignoring her. According to imperial etiquette, if a person of higher status was seated, they should never stand up to greet anyone, even if other guests arrived. It was a polite way to be considerate, as the person of higher status might feel uncomfortable being left sitting alone. But Isabel realized that all the women there had ignored that rule. Sasha gracefully approaches. She gives such an innocent look that it is almost irritating. On the other side of the hall, the imperial consort looked at the Empress. She returned the gaze like the great rivals they were. The guests showered the consort with compliments, noting the elegance of her cream-toned dress. At last, Isabel understood the reason why Duchess Salinger had invited her there. It had probably been at Sasha's request. Surely the girl had deliberately asked the Duchess to invite her, so that Isabel would be in a place where the consort stood out, just to diminish the Empress. Then, the shrewd protagonist understands that it is time to leave. Isabel smiles with satisfaction. Suddenly, everything that was on top of the table is thrown away. The guests were shocked by what had happened, especially Sasha, who had already witnessed other tragic moments. Isabel stood with her hand outstretched. The Empress looked imposing as she faced the other women. She commented to the guests that the laws seemed to be turned upside down in that mansion. According to Isabel, the arrangement of the tea table should be changed accordingly. They try to apologize to the Empress, attempting to fix the situation. Isabel turns to Sasha, calling her. Soon after, she asks the consort if she would like to say something to her. Feeling very nervous, Sasha begins to respond. The girl starts asking Isabel for forgiveness, saying that she arrived in the Empire only recently. She explains that she was not used to those rules of etiquette and promises that she would be more careful next time. Isabel lets out a sigh, noticing how Sasha always came up with more and more excuses, but it was already too irritating to keep reminding her all the time. Our protagonist ponders for a few moments. She realizes that Sasha already seemed quite nervous. Perhaps the concubine had never imagined that she would have to bow to the Empress she had once despised so much. Isabel says that the tea had already been spilled, so it was time for her to leave, and the elegant monarch turned to go. However, before leaving completely, she wanted to give a small warning. She told Sasha that from then on, it would be better for her to be careful with her behavior in front of the Empress. Those words left all the girls in shock. However, Sasha remained silent. She was very nervous about that public reprimand. Sometime later, in the Emperor's office, Sasha told Alexander everything that had happened. He listened to everything she said, and then replied that she should deal with that kind of thing on her own. The girl did not seem to understand. Alexander patiently explained to her that as the Emperor of the Empire, he was not idle enough to intervene in the mess of a simple tea party. He casts a firm look at the girl. Playing innocent, Sasha asks whether she had ever bothered him. Trying to convince him, she says that she was afraid of disappointing him if she did not adapt well to the Empire and its customs. She only wanted to tell him what had happened. He says that he was not bothered at all. Putting on a charming act, Sasha says that the Emperor seemed too busy to listen to her. Alexander wonders why she needed to tell that useless story right now. He anxiously taps his fingers on the table. Finally, the Emperor asked the girl what she would like him to do. She pondered for a few moments. At last, Sasha smiled. The consort tells him that she hopes she is not crossing any line by worrying about this. But after the tea party, she heard the guests insulting the Empress. What Isabel had done that afternoon was surprising even to her. Alexander asks what that had to do with anything. Sasha explains that if she herself told the Empress what had happened, it would be difficult for her to listen. So the girl suggests that he directly express Sasha's concerns to Isabel. After all, he was still her husband, wasn't he? He was still tapping his fingers on the table. Sasha is certain that the Empress would listen to him. At night, the palace was illuminated by the moonlight. Alexander walks down the corridor. The Emperor seemed quite thoughtful about Sasha's request. He gives a malicious smile. The girl had not surpassed his expectations. The truth was that the consort was not as naive as her appearance suggested, and she truly knew a thing or two. Despite taking some time to tell him what she wanted, she eventually revealed it in the end. What Sasha truly wanted was for him to reprimand Isabel for her behavior. But truly, there was no one innocent in that filthy world, because that woman was very similar to him. Sasha was truly cruel and hid behind a facade of innocence and kindness. A filthy soul that thought only of herself, hiding behind her beauty. He would have hated it if she were truly naive and kind. Alexander did not hate having that kind of person by his side, and that was why he placed her under the title of consort, depending on gains and losses. However, that had become very irritating recently. He noticed how she had been becoming more demanding lately, and other things were starting to irritate him. He knocked on the door, thinking that he understood the reason for it. Isabel opened the door, and Alexander was there waiting. The Empress looked very irritated. The woman asked him if there was any urgent reason at such a late hour of the night. However, he remained silent. With a smile, he asks if he may come in. Isabel says nothing. Assessing the situation, she allows him to enter her room, and he thanks her. Alexander stops and thinks for a moment, noticing that it had been quite a long time since he had gone to Isabel's room. He thinks that it must have been more than a month since the last time he was there. The Emperor hears his wife comment that he had ignored her for 2 weeks. So what was the reason that had made him go to her room at midnight? He gives a smile, asking her whether husband and wife really need a special reason to meet. Isabel became even more irritated. She had said that to him at the beginning of the story. She had asked for a divorce, and was that how he wanted to treat her? The Emperor observed his irritated wife. Her expressions had become much more varied. Originally, he knew that his wife was not very expressive. She always seemed nervous, impatient, or even wore a sorrowful smile. But this Isabel was very different. At first, he thought she was simply trying to get his attention, but the more he looked at her, the more it seemed that wasn't really the case. Apparently something had changed, he thought as he lightly moved his hand. Isabel seemed to have become a completely different woman. Her luxuries had increased, but he preferred her that way. For a while, Isabel had imitated Sasha, even wearing the same dresses, which created a rumor that said the Emperor did not spend money on his wife. Amused by that moment, Alexander confessed that he did not know she made that expression. Despite being together for 3 years, he was still surprised to discover new things about her. Isabel asked him if that was true. Everything was so sudden. He says that this new personality suited her very well. The Empress heard her husband praise her expression at that moment. She crosses her arms, thinking that she was mistaken and believing that he had gone to her room at midnight to say something important. Isabel tries to understand the reason for those sudden compliments and replies that she likes her new personality. Interrupting the conversation, she says that if he had nothing truly important to say, it would be better for her to go to sleep and for him to return to his room. Alexander gives a slightly mischievous smile. Before she leaves, he says that her new style pleased him very much. A little anxious, she turns to him and asks if there had been any misunderstanding. She was not dressing that way for him. The Emperor lets out a sigh and says that he knows that very well, since she is the one who talks about divorce every day. He meant that he likes the way she knows how to dress beautifully. Isabel was completely caught off guard by that sincere compliment. How could her heart have sped up a little because of that? She thanks him for the comment. Smiling at her, Alexander asks why her cheeks were so red. Indeed, it was true. Perhaps our protagonist was not accustomed to receiving sincere compliments from handsome men. She says that probably. It must be the lighting that made her red. Isabel justifies that it was not her face that was blushing, but the light in the room. Alexander smiles at her. He thinks that it must be something important to her. Observing her, the Emperor thought that the situation was far more interesting than he had imagined. In fact, he was not mocking her at all. However, there was something. Recently, her behavior had been very different. She seemed like a frightened kitten whenever she was near him. Alexander remembers how she used to be. The former Isabel seemed much more like a lifeless doll than a human. Posing like a marionette, Isabel was unresponsive. He imagines that if she were injured, she would react like a person, and he decided to ask if she remembered what happened at the last dinner party. She did not like that question. What could he be plotting? Alexander confesses that he still did not understand why she had behaved that way, and asks if she knew how much trouble she had caused. He apologizes for the embarrassment. She was surprised to hear the Emperor say that he was grateful they had taken Marquis Wilhelm away. Isabel did not quite understand what he was talking about. Alexander looked at her with his intense golden eyes. He finally explained to her that the Marquis had prevented a neighboring empire from increasing its power, which was not exactly illegal, but the Marquis himself found signs that they were embezzling taxes and military supplies. The Emperor added that even without fully understanding what was going on, he would not easily give in to such a suspicious movement. Isabel also heard him say that he had hired an assassin to injure Marquis Wilhelm until she intervened at the party, which turned out to be a great opportunity. For Alexander, it made sense for him to act politically, because he was certain that the Marquise's supporters would go after him to protest. But what would happen if she intervened? That was what happened. He says that all attention would turn to the Empress and her unpredictable actions. Isabel asked if that was the reason he protected her during the ceremony. Perhaps that was why the next day's newspapers had only news about their love triangle, and nothing about Marquis Wilhelm. The Emperor explained that since everything happened because of the Empress's actions, he sent some physicians to the injured noble. The 8 weeks of recovery would be enough for Alexander to investigate the Marquis's irregularities. He asked if she was satisfied now that the Marquis had been deposed. Alexander said that even the Marchioness was relieved, and that he knew of several women in the palace who disliked him. He gives her a shrewd smile. Alexander suggests that they have a collaborative relationship. The man states that in public, they would maintain the appearance of a couple who did not like each other, but that in truth, the two of them would cooperate with one another. There were many advantages to that arrangement. She says that in fact, they had no relationship at all, and that she refuses His Majesty's offer. Isabel did not want to nurture any further relationship with her future ex-husband. Sparks flew around them. He says that if she thought that way, he would have no other choice. Isabel asked what he meant by that, and he replied that he would have a different proposal for her. Even so, it could be something interesting. He reveals that he was willing to do anything for her. Isabel realized how tough he was to deal with. The Empress asks him to stop speaking to her that way. His insistence only made her more annoyed. She was capable of crossing fire and ice for something she wanted. Alexander crossed his arms and thought for a moment. He commented that the two of them were truly stubborn and said that the best one should win. Isabel lets out a big laugh and asks if he would like to say anything else to her. She warns him that the two of them could end up getting hurt in the process. With a defiant look, she warns him that she had very sharp teeth. Isabel was anything but a loser. Something caught Alexander's attention. As he extended his hand, he began to feel something different. Isabel was also surprised. He desperately wanted to touch her. He gently touched her lips. Even his expression changed completely. He did not know why, but he desired it fervently. More than ever, the Emperor wanted to have Isabel with his own hands. That night, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. A romantic mood seemed to arise. Alexander gently touched Isabel's face, bringing the two closer. He wondered what it was that he was feeling. His fingers continued to touch his wife's face. The Emperor could not understand that he was in love. He could only think about how much he wanted to kiss her, from her mouth to the side of her face. Alexander tried to restrain himself, as he did not know how Isabel would react. The Emperor gently held her face with both hands and moved closer to kiss her. The two drew nearer, but something did not go as expected. A feather pillow is thrown, and it struck the Emperor hard, who was still confused about what was happening. Alexander asked Isabel what she was doing. She grips the pillow more tightly. Very startled, the Empress asked what he was thinking. Quite furious, Isabel asked if he had completely lost his mind. She hit him repeatedly with the pillow, saying that this would not make her give up on the divorce and that this trick would not work on her. Alexander asks Isabel to calm down. She asked if she looked calm at that moment. Isabel abruptly closed the doors. The Emperor was devastated. His wife threw him out of the room, leaving him in pieces. She tossed the pillow back onto the bed. Isabel was completely furious at his audacity. How dare he try something like that while she was trying to divorce him? That near kiss. That was truly very unexpected for her. At last, she realized something. It was better for Isabel to stop thinking about it. She believed that a man like him could never have feelings for her, because he only had eyes for Sasha. To our protagonist, he was merely a man in a romantic fantasy. Originally in the story, Isabel tried to win him over even though they were married, so he could not suddenly become interested in her. She thought that trying to kiss someone you do not care about was a waste of time. That face combined with that personality must have made many women cry. Why would she have felt so happy that a man had tried to kiss her, even knowing that he did not love her? A new day begins in the palace. Isabel's sleep had been disturbed the night before, and because of that, she looked very tired. She thought irritably that all of that was his fault. Our protagonist was so startled that she preferred to kick him out before something worse happened. If she injured the Emperor's face, she could suffer far more serious consequences. She thought that if the Emperor wanted to punish her for what happened the night before, he would have already done something, right? But since he had not commented on it, perhaps he had let it go. That situation bothered her greatly. Isabel had many other things on her mind. After all, the Empress was still responsible for many matters within the court. She should support cultural events and the well-being of the people, cultivating diplomacy among smaller kingdoms, many things that might go unnoticed, but that were essential to the empire. Those duties were supposedly meant to be shared by the Empress and the consort, but Sasha was completely clueless. It had already been 6 months since she arrived at the court. Isabel picked up her quill pen. She was tired of having such a heavy workload and wished the Empire would give her some respite. Her maids approached, claiming that Your Majesty seemed very tired and offering to help her with whatever she needed. Isabel said that everything would be fine. However, she quickly remembered that she was the villain in that story. She asks the maids to wait a little. On the other side of the palace, many maids were praising Sasha's hair and porcelain skin. They asked whether Emperor Alexander liked her fair skin. A figure approaches the door. The bedroom doors burst open abruptly. Sasha was very startled by the Empress's arrival. She told Isabel that it was very sudden for her to be there. The Empress lets out a loud laugh. After throwing several papers onto the table, she says that she had been working far too much. And she adds that meanwhile, Sasha was being praised for her hair and skin. Now it was the consort's duty to accompany her in the royal work. Isabel asks Sasha, "Why don't you stop being a lazy woman?" Later that day in the palace, Isabel was having a cup of tea. The Empress enjoyed a bit of peace and quiet. She was satisfied because she had left all the work to Sasha, since clearly the consort would not know how to do it properly. Sasha begged Isabel to give her some time so she could learn, maybe a month or even a week. Isabel said she would not grant her a single extra day, and that the deadline started immediately. The consort tried to evade her duties by saying that the Emperor had ordered her to take some time off from work. Isabel says that Alexander's orders had no effect on her. The Empress asks what Sasha had been doing during all those months. Clearly, she knew that not everything would go well. Sasha did not work well at all, as many parts of the palace were left without maintenance. She chose the wrong people for diplomatic ties and spent money on meaningless things. A palace was like a machine house, whose gears needed to fit together perfectly. After only 3 days of handing the work over to Sasha, things began to go off the rails. Some servants begged Isabel to return to her duties as before, because things were not going well. They begged more and more, and our protagonist realized how much Isabel had done favors for everyone without receiving any gratitude in return. The two of them were very fearful because of the problems. In truth, it was difficult for Isabel as well to let things happen that way, but she needed to maintain her villainous stance. The Empress asks the servants who had ordered the two of them to come speak with her. Had she not just said that she was not interested in the work? Isabel asked them what Alexander was doing at that moment. The two remained silent, too embarrassed to speak. They confess that the consort's assistants do their best to help her, but even that was not enough. Isabel knows that not all the assistants in the world would be able to help someone with Sasha's weak little mind, but she refused to give in because she did not want to return to her former days. Isabel puts an end to that situation and says that enough is enough. And so, she sent everyone out and continued with her strategy. Apparently, after everyone left, someone arrived who had not been invited. Alexander looked at her with a firm gaze. He asked her to resume her royal duties as he was responsible for teaching the noble consort. The Empress heard him say that her workload would even be reduced. Isabel became annoyed because, besides raising his voice at her, Alexander called Sasha noble. He apologizes, saying that he was insensitive and made things worse. Alexander confesses that he does not expect her to forgive his foolishness, and that he promises he will not allow that to happen again. Isabel says that many things happened within that palace. She grows irritated hearing him say that he had no authority to speak about the palace's affairs. So that was a request, not an imperial order. As emperor, a favor to the Empress, a partner to govern the empire. That speech took Isabel by surprise. The truth was that she was not expecting a sincere apology from him. She did not care about his apologies or about Sasha's suffering. Isabel reminds him of one detail. She points out his statement in which he promised that he would not let that happen again. Then, she asks him to write a memorandum reminding him of his duty to properly educate the consort and to divide the work fairly. Alexander says that he hopes she will trust him, so that he will write the memorandum. She says that there should be a condition if the agreement is not fulfilled. Isabel smiles with satisfaction. The Empress has only one request: the divorce. Alexander remains silent. Despite being a little annoyed, he accepted the agreement. Swearing on his name, he asks for the papers to be brought for him to sign. Isabel thinks that he should simply accept the divorce and let the consort become his empress. Why was he choosing such a difficult path? In any case, the emperor truly kept his word. Sasha gained 5 tutors, totaling almost 10 hours of classes every day. It was almost as if she were preparing for college. Meanwhile, Isabel dealt with all the poorly done work left by the consort and worked so hard that she could be called a bad girl. She completed all the remaining work in 15 days. It was very difficult to bring things back to normal, and the people who began working with her praised her greatly. The servants praised the Empress throughout the palace. Everyone returned to admiring her and commented on her grace. Isabel asks them to stop it. While the maids were talking, Sasha listened from afar. Those praises directed at the Empress infuriated the consort. In the palace, some maids commented that the Empress had hired experts in administration. The girls wondered, how could she have thought of that? One of them shared her theory. There were 3 people, including the official responsible for managing the imperial palace. Another was the official responsible for charity work. And lastly, the official of culture and the arts. Apparently, they were doing extremely well. One of the maids began telling the others about her latest conversation with the empress in the palace. Isabel was a very humble woman. The maids were very impressed by her composure. They chatted in the garden while Sasha walked nearby. The consort listened with some discomfort as the girls praised the empress. A few days later, a tea party took place, which had been organized by the imperial consort. It was the first time the guests had seen so many beautiful flowers together. One of the guests said there must have been more than 4,000 flowers. Extending a flower, Sasha asks if the lady liked it. Then she reveals that all of them had been a gift from Alexander. Sasha says that she did not want anything excessive, but that he insisted. The guests were enchanted by the love the emperor seemed to have for the consort. However, someone had something different to say. A blonde man named Count Damien commented that none of them knew how terrifying the emperor was in official meetings. He argues that Alexander would not show such kindness to the imperial consort without feeling love for her. Another woman argues that the emperor was an adorable man. Count Damien says that he was only like that with women because many people had lost their lives due to his whims. He began to reveal a secret, but gave up. Sasha was very uncomfortable with the Count's words. The consort says that Alexander truly was a very capricious emperor, but that she understood nothing about politics. The conceited man says that she should not know anything about politics anyway for being a woman, and that the emperor was constantly busy with affairs of the realm. One of the girls comments that Sasha had been studying a lot. Count Damien is left speechless upon hearing that Sasha had been studying hard to be a better consort for the empire. She wanted to work hard because she knew that lately she had not helped much. She says that the emperor loved her very much and cared about her. Sasha says that she had been studying so much lately that she was feeling a little dizzy. One of the ladies asks for the servants to be called. The consort apologizes and says that she would not like her guests to see her like that. Sasha begins to tell them what she wanted was to no longer trouble the empress and to be able to accept more responsibilities. She looked at the guests while they discussed the consort's work. Sasha laughed discreetly, feeling a slight sense of satisfaction. The consort told everyone that she was fine. The girl confessed that she wanted to become someone as competent and capable as the empress, who had the great idea of hiring specialists to help her with imperial matters, while all Sasha could do was learn on her own. But that came as a surprise to the guests. Sasha explained that since Isabel was the empress, she must have thought carefully before making that decision. After all, she had spent a lot of money, nearly 5 million gold coins. Count Damien reveals that he knew about the empress's luxuries, but did not expect her to spend all that money, even though it did not compare to what she had done with Marquis Wilhelm. Everyone commented that nothing like that had ever happened in the entire history of the empire. Was she really the right person to be the empress? The Count tells Sasha that her father was the one who dealt directly with the affairs of the emperor and the empress. He tells the ladies that men who take part in political affairs need to be more logical and rational. They all looked at him with a certain disdain. Then, one of them suggests that he go speak directly with the emperor about Isabel's expenses, since he was so logical. Count Damien was confused and asked why she said that. The young woman replied that he was the only one there who saw the emperor frequently, so he was the only possible choice. He became terrified, claiming that he was just a newcomer to the empire. The man heard the ladies reminding him that he had bragged to them about his many connections and that he should be a brave man. Suddenly, Sasha calls out to him. She declares that if he could speak with the emperor, it would be of great help to her. With tears in her eyes, the consort says that she will do her best so that Alexander does not become so angry. Count Damien was left speechless. At last, he was convinced. Now he was determined to go speak with the emperor. The afternoon refreshment continues. Sasha was very grateful because everything had been far too easy. Ladies and other young women did not react as passionately as men, so it was difficult to incite them to do anything. But it did not take much to convince a man surrounded by women to react impulsively. Sasha was very satisfied to see that her plans were going well. A new day begins in the palace. Noblemen arrive for a meeting with the emperor. Among them, Count Damien. He wondered if this was really the right thing to do. Despite being apprehensive, he could not ignore what Sasha had asked of him during the tea party. He was very reflective, but he was determined to help his friend. The men sit at the table to begin the meeting. Still reflecting, he placed his hand on the papers. At last, he considered that matter appropriate for the agenda. To Count Damien, it was completely ridiculous that such a reckless woman could be the empress. She had been audacious enough to make the consort cry. It was Sasha who should be empress, not Isabel. The Count believed that a patriotic man like himself could not let such matters slide. Now it was time to act. Before Alexander began the meeting agenda, Count Damien quickly stood up and declared that he would like to say something. His uncle, Marquis Damien, immediately reprimanded him, saying that if he wanted to add something, he should have consulted him beforehand. Count Damien was very annoyed by that interruption because he was no longer a child to follow his uncle's orders, and he would seize that opportunity opportunity to show his abilities. He explains that he needs to speak about certain matters concerning the Empress, and two assistants hand over some reports that he had investigated. The Marquis stood up quickly, asking the Count how he dared to bring something like that without consulting him first. Alexander tells the Marquis that everything was fine. Count Damien lets out a sigh of relief. The Emperor says that all of this was very interesting. He was very interested in learning about that agenda for a public debate on punishments for the Empress's atrocities. Alexander asked the others whether that was really his opinion. Count Damien confirmed that it was. With a slight smile, the Emperor asks him to continue. Thinking that the Emperor was interested in his opinion, he began his speech. As he commented on his investigation, other older men of the Imperial Council conversed among themselves. The two judged that Count Damien was probably envious of the previous generations. But at that moment, he was full of himself, thinking that his abilities were being recognized and that he might obtain a higher position. Even the Emperor was smiling during his speech. Obviously, he was listening carefully. When he finished, Alexander praised his presentation. At last, the Emperor asked whether that opinion had been influenced by someone else. Count Damien cheerfully revealed that he and 6 other friends had reached those conclusions. Alexander surprised him by saying that then there were only 7 foolish people in that place. He had incited a public debate about the atrocities that the Empress had committed against Marquis Wilhelm. His uncle listened in anguish as the Emperor asked his nephew whether he had ever considered the reasons why she had done that. Alexander called for the secretary. He returned quickly holding a stack of papers. The Emperor said that the Count should perhaps take a look at them, if his head was not merely an ornament, and he asks all the lords present to read what was written. Alexander throws some papers at Count Damien. With trembling hands, he picks up one of the sheets. The Count was shocked to discover that the Marquis's previous accusations were of exporting military supplies and embezzling taxes. Another noble was very shocked, not knowing what to say about it. The lords agreed that the evidence was quite clear. Alexander revealed to everyone that Marquis Wilhelm was about to flee to the kingdom of Rüdiken, and after the Empress discovered this, she risked her reputation to deal with it with her own hands. Count Damien read all the papers, shocked by the gravity of the accusations. He realized that he had made a huge mistake. The Count could barely pronounce his words. Damien tried to point out the Empress's expenses in hiring specialists to handle the internal affairs of the palace, as that could be a violation. Alexander responds by demanding that the Count read the conditions under which Sasha left the palace when she was put in charge of handling those matters. The Emperor said that Isabel realized it would be inappropriate for only 2 people to take care of the palace's work, and that everything could be disrupted if she were unable to work. Count Damien was once again left speechless. Alexander, rising from the throne, asked what was more important to him, maintaining customs or ensuring security so that palace affairs could proceed smoothly. The Emperor said that now only one problem remained: how he would deal with the other 6 idiots who had defamed the Empress without knowing the circumstances. Immediately, he ordered his guards to take Count Damien to the dungeons. Far from there, in another part of the palace, Isabel was having tea while thinking that the time had come to speak with Alexander about their divorce once again. She was feeling a little uncomfortable with all of that. A few days pass. Sasha rests in her room. The consort lets out a sigh, a little sad. She reflected that despite having used bait for the speech, her plans had failed. What could one expect from such a young and immature man? There had already been a Count before. Interrupting her thoughts, one of the maids approaches, asking if Sasha was all right. The young woman asks what the imperial consort was thinking about. Sasha says it was nothing serious, and the girl says that it seemed like she was pondering difficult matters. Sasha confesses to her that the Emperor had not visited her in a long time. The maids are very saddened by that news, but ask her not to worry so much. After all, the Emperor was a very busy man. The girl says that he still visited her even when he was very busy, and that she would like to feel useful to him. One of the maids suggests that Sasha work as a goddess, for Sasha was capable of bringing new things between worlds, and it was something only she could do. The girl suggests that Sasha create a new narrative from another world. Quickly, the consort stands up and thanks the maids. That was a great idea, and Isabel would not be able to do that. Sasha hopes that the Empress will not remain arrogant for much longer. It was now October, the season when trees turned orange and birds began building their nests. And to welcome the new season, she wanted to hold an event as a goddess. Isabel reads a letter from Sasha inviting her to attend as she presents herself as a goddess. Our protagonist cannot remember if that happened in the original storyline. Reading the letter again, she realizes that this event was unprecedented. The Empress then assumes that the consort had arranged this merely to interfere with her plans. Moreover, if she wanted to build a relationship, she should focus on giving gifts or spending more time together. Alexander looked at her with unexpected unexpected affection. He seemed very happy to see her, but she was annoyed because the number of times they saw each other intentionally had increased. Why was he like that? In any case, it meant nothing if only Sasha was concerned. Our protagonist was curious to know more. She stood up from her armchair. Isabel was satisfied to have been invited. The girl thought it would be worth going. Guests begin to arrive at the palace. Some nobles of the realm chatted cheerfully. Suddenly, someone arrives wearing a delicate light pink dress. Sasha, the imperial consort, finally arrived, wearing a style somewhat ahead of its time. That caused a certain surprise among the guests. She wondered whether dresses above the knees were too revealing in that kingdom. People there wore long dresses even in the summer. Sasha decided to let that go. She knew very well that she needed to rebuild her influence in the palace, so she had to stand out greatly in that speech. The truth was that she did not care about the opinions of the other nobles, and she knew that no one would do anything suspicious because they knew who she was. However, she knew that someone would do anything to sabotage her. She could be a problem, precisely because she was a woman capable of stealing everyone's attention, even Alexander's. Sasha thought that this event would not be an exception, for Isabel would certainly wear a glamorous dress and many accessories to stand out. The consort walked toward the event. She knew that not long ago, Isabel had been just an ordinary girl. Sasha bit her lips nervously, but she managed to smile, disguising her anxiety. That day, she was determined to be the main character, no matter what others did. Finally, she arrives at the Grand Golden Hall and greets the nobles. She introduces herself as Sasha, the imperial consort. Before she could finish her greetings to the audience, a detail caught her off guard. She saw that her hands were trembling. Trying to continue her speech, she says that it was her first time holding an event, but inside, she could hardly believe what was happening. As she spoke, the guest seemed distracted by something more interesting. Seated on her throne, Isabel tapped her fingers on the arm of the chair. Sasha wondered what there was about that dress. The guests barely seemed to notice Sasha. There was no way the Empress's dress could be more eye-catching than hers. Then Isabel asks the guests to pay attention to her and tells everyone that the imperial consort can barely say a word. The Empress asks everyone to look forward so as not to embarrass her. With a smile and a nod, she asks Sasha to continue her speech. However, Sasha was still very unsettled by Isabel's audacity. Sasha thanks her, but she was still trembling a little. Even so, she wanted to resume her speech. Continuing her speech, she hears new voices, and she saw what was happening. Alexander, handing his coat to Isabel, asks her to cover her legs with it. Our protagonist refused, saying that she was not feeling cold. The Emperor insists that she cover herself. Sasha even forgot what she was about to say when she saw her beloved Alexander paying attention to Isabel. She tries to compose herself and decides that this is the last time the Empress will embarrass her. Sasha was the hostess of the event and did not intend to let anyone disrupt it. The girl calls the guests' attention once more, and then she decided to talk about smartphones. She comments that in her country of origin, that was an essential item. Isabel, thinking about her past life, imagined that it would be an object that might interest the people of the kingdom. Perhaps they would even think it was a royal item, however. Among the guests, a blonde man says that he did not believe it. How could something fit in the palm of one's hand and have so many functions? He says that he wanted to try that item at that very moment. Sasha was a little flustered, not knowing how to react to the request. The guests asked whether she was capable of creating a smartphone. A lady said that possibly she was, since she spoke so well about it. And another noble commented that the consort was very talented. Sasha was cornered. Would it not be enough just to tell a good story? Quite embarrassed, she confesses to the guests that it would not be possible to create a smartphone. The man asked her why not, since she was a goddess. Sasha tries to justify herself by saying that she was only an apprentice. Isabel, now with her legs covered, watched the disaster without saying a word. She was satisfied that it was turning into a fiasco. In that kingdom, universities were something quite different. In the Empire, if someone decided to go to university, that meant that the person would devote themselves to knowledge and education. However, many nobles did not attend university. But in her original world, not everyone wanted to go to university either. Since Sasha had mentioned being an apprentice, she should be capable of creating a smartphone. Isabel wonders why Alexander does not go help her, since he was the consort's romantic partner. And then, someone asks everyone to be quiet. Sasha looked at Isabel, who was far away. Isabel looked back at her. The consort was furious and very embarrassed. After all, what was she thinking? Was the Empress trying to pretend empathy? But the girl was determined not to end the event that way. She turns to her maids and asks them to bring something. The girls say that they did not know if it was ready yet and that they might need more time. Sasha insists that they bring it immediately. She thanks all the guests for their presence. and then informs everyone that she had prepared a variety of dishes and would like them to try them. Isabel wonders what kind of dish she had brought. What could it be? A noblewoman says that the color of the meal was quite beautiful. Another guest comments that the portion was pleasing and had a sweet aroma. Sasha declares that they may help themselves freely as a buffet had been prepared. She hoped that everyone would like the food so that they would respond well after she explained how the meals had been prepared. However, the audience began to react very badly, complaining that the food was sticky. One guest complained that it was sticky to chew, while another man complained about the spiciness. Sasha was stunned, seeing the guests complain and even ask for water. Isabel picked up a toothpick. She skewered a portion of the food and began to taste it. Our protagonist thought it was quite tasty, even though the menu was a bit strange. Some guests wondered whether they could eat that food. Isabel assumed that the people of the kingdom did not seem to like honey rice cakes and kimchi dumplings. Even in her home country, foreigners usually found them a bit strange, despite them being delicious dishes. She thought it would be a shame if they were simply thrown away. Isabel thought for a few moments. Sasha wondered how things had come to that point. She would not stop trembling. Supposedly, Sasha was meant to be the main character. That reaction was not good at all. She was very lost and did not know what to do. Suddenly, Isabel clapped her hands. The Empress asked for everyone's attention. She said she would like to thank everyone for their presence at the event. Sasha was desolate listening to Isabel say that she had also prepared a simple dish using the same ingredients the consort had used. The guests wondered what kind of food the Empress was talking about. Isabel smiled, satisfied with herself. She saw how the guests seemed a little frightened. Our protagonist thought that there was nothing special about kimchi, but that combination was really a pity. Forcing the guests to eat when they did not like it was a bit too much. Suddenly, Alexander called his wife, who turned to him. The emperor said that he would like to eat. She then asked whether he would like to taste something first. He asked whether there was something wrong with that, and he also said that he hoped the food would not be as bad as before. Isabel explained that there was no reason for him not to try it, but she feared that the food might alter his precious palate. With a slight smile, he asked where her confidence had gone. Our protagonist became very irritated. Isabel said to him, "Very well then." She told him that she had prepared a buffet and that he could help himself to whatever he wanted. Alexander said that this looked more like the Isabel he knew. Our protagonist wondered what the hell he meant by that. She became a little worried about it. As he served himself, she explained that she had not been able to find all the necessary ingredients, so she had to be creative. All the guests were silent. No one dared to say a word. The emperor was open-mouthed. Isabel was a little alarmed, waiting for his reaction. Alexander said that her food was delicious. Everyone was shocked. How could the food be different? He said that the spicy seasoning had dissipated in the water, so it was not too strong. The bacon and vegetables went well together. The cheese complemented the flavor very well. Isabel wondered how he could explain all of that so well. The guests did not know which options to choose. Our protagonist was very relieved. She was happy that they liked the fried kimchi and the pancakes. Isabel was a very determined empress. In the empire, there was no soy sauce, so she had to use a mixture of salt and rice. One of the guests asked to eat more pancakes. More guests praised Isabel's food. The protagonist imagined that they were enjoying it because they were hungry, poor things. She was happy that everything had ended well at that dinner. Sasha had left silently, so Isabel had to manage the event, since she did not want Alexander to see her failing. Perhaps the consort was not in the best moment to think about that. Instead, she was curious to know Alexander's plans. Isabel accepted his invitation for them to dine together, because he had helped her taste some of the food, but she was not sure what he was plotting. Mentally, she prepared herself to stay alert. Alexander explained that he still wanted to convince her to collaborate with him, but that was not the only reason for the invitation. She wondered whether that was why he had abandoned her before. Why had he decided to help her then? The emperor revealed that he had not known she was so skilled. Isabel lied, saying that after they got married, she began to take an interest in cooking. Alexander asked whether that was true. Looking at him, our protagonist thought he was a truly fascinating man. She had read about his appearance in the story. Perhaps because of that, she could understand some of his actions in every situation. When she first read it, the first thing that came to her mind was that, in truth, Alexander was a tyrant emperor who only cared about Sasha. Clearly, that must have been the case. However, looking at him as they walked together, things really did seem to have changed quite a lot. In the afternoon, in the Imperial Garden, Isabel knew that Alexander was very observant. He would not care about anything other than the person he loved. As she walked, she thought that soon the two of them would become strangers, but that she still needed to discover a few things. Then the man told her to look over there. Those were Isabella flowers, beautiful and delicate, yet poisonous. Some people still use them to make medicine. Isabel thought that Alexander would take her to his room, and so she could hardly believe that they had gone to the garden. A little irritated, she said that they were not there just to look at the flowers. Alexander replied that appreciating the view of the flowers with his empress had a certain charm. Isabel then asked if he was talking about the empress whom he had abandoned for almost 3 years. His gaze changed quickly. At last, he replied that she was right, and that it had not been fair. That change in attitude surprised Isabel. He had given many excuses before when she mentioned the divorce. Thinking that way, had his attitude changed? Clenching her fist tightly, she remembered that he had a huge ego. That acknowledgement had not been sincere. She asked whether he was going to apologize. Alexander said that he could apologize insincerely as many times as she wanted, so that Isabel would not mention the divorce again. For him, lying to gain a political ally was not that difficult. Isabel began to reply to him, but she stopped and paid attention to the flowers. Alexander approached her and said that if it was not what he wanted, then the two of them were even. He told her that perhaps one day he would regret what he had done. Isabel remained silent, intrigued by his words. The emperor asked her to let it go as he was already talking nonsense again. When she read the original story, Isabel judged him to be a sociopath. All the cruel acts he committed without hesitation were all because of Sasha. Aside from the consort, he showed no feelings for anyone, as he saw people as trash. Remembering that, our protagonist became a little wary. She replied to him that she did not understand what he was talking about. Isabel asked whether someone's memories should not be forgotten. Alexander remained silent for a few moments, and soon stated that she merely wanted to ignore his words, and that pleased him. The protagonist said that being with him did not please her at all, but since he did not seem shaken, she found his words very strange. He approached and declared that he did not care whether she believed him or not. Alexander said that bringing her there as his ally was not something dangerous. He truly had brought her to the garden so that they could see the flowers. Offering his hand to her, he said that now it was time to go. Isabel leaned back, feeling wary of accepting his offer. Was this man taking advantage of his own beauty to win her over? In the end, she accepted holding his hand, knowing that she would not fall for his intentions. To her, no meant no. She preferred to change her life rather than fall in love with Alexander. He told her that he had enjoyed that afternoon very much. Isabel told him to thank the imperial consort because it was Sasha who had organized the entire event. She asked whether Alexander did not want to go down to see how the party was going. Staring at her with his golden eyes, he remained silent. The emperor gently held his wife's hand. Leaving her surprised, he bent down and gave a gentle kiss. Isabel did not understand the reason for that kiss. His lips moved away from her soft hand. Alexander gave her a slightly mischievous smile. Furious, she asked him what that had been. Soon they would be divorcing. Alexander laughed, saying that that was how a lady should be treated. Her cheeks grew very flushed. Isabel said that if they were done with the farewell, it was time for her to leave, and slamming the doors behind her, she wished him good night. Inside her room, she reflected on what had just happened. Isabel noticed that he was loyal to no one, and that he would flirt with any girl just to get what he wanted. On the other side of the door, Alexander wondered why he was acting in such a strange way. It was as if he were drunk. A new day begins in the palace, and some nobles were already conversing. One of them commented that the Empress had slapped Marquis Wilhelm to ensure the suspension of his duties while he was being dishonest. Far from there, some ladies spoke about having misunderstood Isabel's motives for causing that scene, how noble it was of the Empress to sacrifice her reputation to save the palace. They all mentioned the incident in the Golden Hall. The event had nearly ended in disaster, but she managed to resolve the situation. She was a woman very suited to be Empress. Hidden behind a pillar, Sasha listened to that conversation. She remained silent, reflecting a little. A few days later, at night, one of Sasha's maids asks her to eat a little. The girl explains that the dinner had been made with all the food she liked. She tries to comfort Sasha, saying that the consort was not at fault for what happened at the event. Sasha simply replied that she wanted to be alone, but the maid revealed that she was quite worried about her, since the consort had not eaten for 2 days. Annoyed by the insistence, Sasha ordered her to leave because she wanted to be alone. The two remained silent for a moment. The maid did not understand why she had been so rude. Sasha apologized, explaining that she was irritated because she was very busy, and asked the maid to withdraw. The girl left the room, finally leaving her alone. Sasha held her sheets tightly. All of that was very strange to her. How did Isabel know those dishes? The dishes the Emperor had tasted were kimchi soup and kimchi fried rice. Isabel had lived in the Empire her entire life. The shaken consort wondered what the chances were that the Empress could create a dish identical to one from another world. If for some reason Isabel knew Korean culture, how would she have arrived in that world? That would not be possible, because only an oracle can travel between dimensions. If a mortal crosses worlds, their memories can be reversed. The most likely explanation was that Isabel had learned about Korean culture by overhearing conversations or reading something in a book, but Sasha could not understand how that could be possible, since the only bridge between worlds was the goddess. People who arrived there from another world brought their culture and helped others. In that way, new cultures were spread throughout the empire and preserved in books. It would be impossible for Isabel to know something that others did not know. Sasha sat down on the bed. The girl looked at her trembling hands. What could she do in that situation? She seemed devastated by fear. All of that was very complicated for Sasha to deal with. To the consort, everything seemed to be falling apart. From her relationship with Alexander, her social status, and even her target was turning against her. That was precisely why she needed to find out how Isabel had obtained that information. If the Empress were to become a great threat, a peasant woman asked a worker who that newcomer was. He said it was a woman who had arrived there with several guards. The Empress was walking. Her arrival caused great surprise among the common people. Isabel was satisfied that she had managed to draw so much attention. It was common for citizens to gather to take a look at the Empress. That was De La Mancha Street. It was a kind of black market, where the things sold could be illegal or not, and therefore it was the perfect place to obtain some suspicious items. Isabel knew that it was definitely not a suitable place for a lady. The maids at the palace were quite worried about her. She felt a certain pity for the guards, who were also afraid. The Empress had no choice. Alexander had been very strange recently, so perhaps she needed to create an even more drastic situation to obtain the divorce. Spending a fortune in a place like that could be seen as a disgrace to the royal family. She ordered the guards to follow her. Isabel chose a shop to begin the purchases. She hoped to spend all the money she had brought. At the end of the afternoon, Isabel was sitting on a bench, holding her face in her hands. The Empress was devastated. She was doomed. Our protagonist wanted to spend all her money on suspicious magical items, but she was surprised at the last shop. She asked the merchant to sell her everything. He asked whether she really wanted everything in the shop. However, Isabel was shocked to hear him say that they only sold first-rate products that the emperor would love. What she truly wanted was to escape that world, but apparently everyone thought she was buying gifts for the emperor. There had to be something she could do. She stopped for a few moments to think. Suddenly, a commotion began to draw several people toward a place. Isabel grew curious to know what was happening. She asked one of the guards why people were gathering. The guard explained to her that an auction was taking place. That caught Isabel's attention, and she thought it would be an opportunity. How had she not thought of that before? There could be very valuable things that she could acquire. Isabel quickly stood up and ordered her guards to go with her. She imagined that there she might find something spectacular that could help her divorce immediately. The auctioneer greeted the ladies and gentlemen, thanking them for their presence. He assured them that he had the best merchandise in the empire. However, the merchandise he mentioned consisted of prisoners from the wars that occurred in the empire who were under imperial law. Isabel had never considered that people could be merchandise. She reflected that although it was not illegal, unfortunately the law had loopholes that allowed it to happen. The nobles refrained from acquiring them, as they did not want foreigners. Among them, there was a young woman who seemed sad and was trembling greatly with fear. That was something that violated human rights. But there in that world, Isabel had to act like the nobility. Thinking about it, one of the characters in the story had a past related to this. The auctioneer announces the first merchandise. It was a girl of only 18 years old who knew how to sew very well and had a beautiful face. The girl shed a tear as the man described her. That scene left Isabel devastated. The auction deeply upset her. The bids kept increasing more and more. One of the interested parties offered an even higher amount. The auctioneer asked if there was anyone else interested, until Isabel ordered him to stop. She stood up, surprising everyone. With a determined look, Isabel said that these were orders from the Empress. Everyone wondered what she was doing there. The auctioneer was left speechless. The girl watched the scene, deeply impressed, yet still afraid. She watched Isabel gracefully pass by her. The Empress announced that she, Isabel of Castile, decreed that the auction was to be ended and that everyone should leave. The man tried to stop her, saying that if it were done that way, he would suffer a great commercial loss because he would lose the trust of his clients. She cast a threatening look at him. The man was terrified by her power. Indeed, that made sense. Isabel handed him a blank check. Then she explained that as soon as she wrote a number on it, everyone would leave with her. The auctioneer was astonished by the check. He thanked her repeatedly, and our protagonist realized how he cared about nothing but money. She noticed that people were already leaving, and she walked toward the auctioneer and the girl. Assessing the situation, she saw that they were people who probably did not know the language and might not be able to manage on their own, possibly even going hungry. If bad people found them, they could be taken again. Isabel reflected on how she could resolve this. What could she do? After a few moments, she said that she was now responsible for them. From that point on, they should trust her. Then she declared that, in addition to that, they would go with her to the palace to help her with work. Far from there, in the imperial palace, the secretary told Alexander that Isabel had gone to De la Mancha Street. He anxiously tapped his fingers on the edge of the bathtub. His secretary noticed how the emperor expressed his irritation through that habit. The man explained that with the empress going to that place, the reputation of the imperial family could be affected. However, Alexander replied that that was not the problem. He asked if he did not know how dangerous that place was. The secretary silently watched him finish his bath. Alexander said that he would probably have to go there personally to fetch her. There in the hall where the auction took place, one of the guards reminded her that the palace was not an appropriate place for them and asked her to reconsider letting them work at the imperial palace. Isabel watched the guards who were trying at all costs to convince her not to take those people to work at the palace. She ordered them to shut up because she would take responsibility for all of them from that point on. Everyone looked fearfully at the empress. She commanded that all of them receive proper education, learn the imperial language and the laws of that kingdom for 3 hours every day. The girl was moved and began to thank Isabel. She bowed before the empress, who looked at her in surprise. Crying profusely, the girl thanked Isabel for her mercy. Our protagonist remained silent for a few moments, and she thought about how frightened those people must be after everything that had happened. Unfortunately, prisoners like that young girl never knew their fate or what dangers they would face. Isabel ordered her guards to remove all the chains and take everyone to the palace. She assumed that since they were adults, they could study for a year, and then she would donate enough money for them to become independent in the future. Suddenly, she heard a man arguing with someone. A very cruel man was scolding a young boy, ordering him to hurry up and do things faster. The boy's hands were trembling. The man said that they were all the same. Before he could do anything, Isabel had an impulse. How could a human being harm someone so young? She ordered that man to stop immediately and asked if that boy was a prisoner. Since she had bought the freedom of everyone, how could there be someone left? She grew furious as the filthy man explained that the boy was worthless because he limped on one leg. Isabel told the man that she would take the child with her. In addition, she asked him for the whip. The boy on the ground remained silent, unable to imagine what was going to happen. The empress stepped forward to take the whip and told the man that he did not seem to know how dangerous that was. Quickly, she lashed out and struck him across the face. He was severely injured, but Isabel was quite satisfied. The empress told that filthy man that he had no right to harm anyone, especially a child. She held the whip firmly and finally said that if he kept standing there, she would make him taste the danger. The man was terrified, and before anything else could happen, he turned to leave and ran away from there. The empress's guard was shocked by what had happened. Our protagonist noticed that she had only struck once, but that her arm was hurting. The guard explained that maybe it was because she had never done that before, logically due to the fact that the empress did not perform many activities that required physical effort. In any case, Isabel assumed that everything would be fine, and that this would make the emperor divorce her as soon as possible. By her logic, the empress went to a shady market, secured the freedom of many people, and even assaulted a merchant. Her guards seemed fed up with all of it. Isabel thought that soon she would finally be free. The boy began to speak to her. He thanked her greatly for the empress's kindness. Isabel, worried about him, asked if he was okay. She would arrange proper treatment for him, but something surprised her. So many twists. The boy began to say that he had not been very well before, but that he was willing to devote his entire life to repay the favor she had done for him. Isabel approached him. Who could that handsome boy with light hair and eyes be? She asked him what his name was. The boy began to introduce himself. His name was Caleb. Isabel thought that name sounded familiar. That name was one of the male protagonists of the story. Caleb was a boy who appeared in the middle of the original story, and, contrary to what his innocent appearance suggested, he had a dark side. He had been enslaved since he was very young because his parents were prisoners of war. But the boy was self-taught and learned magic on his own, rising to the 7th level as an archmage. With all that magic and talent, he managed to save himself and freed himself from slavery, creating a guild of informants. In the original story, he was in love with Sasha, and as an archmage, he used the guild's information to help her. But could it really be that Caleb? In the auction hall, Isabel held the boy's face in her hands. Analyzing his physical features, he seemed to have the same slightly wavy brown hair, long eyelashes, and even that innocent little face. She judged that he should be around 16 years old at that time, but he was too small and looked younger. Isabel felt distressed thinking that he was malnourished because of the years of being enslaved. Even his personality seemed more timid than in the original book. Was it because he was still very young? Caleb tried to say something to her. Finally, the protagonist realized that she was gripping him and apologized. She said that she would let him go, until their conversation was interrupted by someone who had just arrived. Wow, Alexander managed to arrive in time. Isabel was very surprised to see him so suddenly. The emperor asked his wife what she was doing there. The empress and the boy remained silent. staring at him. Alexander approached the two of them, repeating the question. What was Isabel doing there? Instead of answering him, she asked, what was he doing there? She did so, knowing that she already knew the answer. Isabel assessed that he must have been so furious with her that he personally came to fetch her from Rue de la Mancha. With a big smile, the Empress asked her husband if he was there to scold her. If that was the case, it would be better for him to expel her from the palace. But he did not answer anything. So much mystery. Alexander simply asked who that scruffy little boy was. Isabel replied that she had bought his freedom and that of other prisoners. He asked why she had tried to kiss the boy. Isabel was very surprised, knowing that that was not what had really happened. Furious, the Empress asked what he was talking about. She explained that she was looking at his injuries. Did he think she was shameless enough to kiss a boy? Alexander finally noticed the boy's injuries. Isabel noticed a change in the Emperor. She saw that instead of getting angry, he was relieved upon understanding the situation. He said that he was grateful that nothing serious had happened. It would have been a terrible rumor to spread through the streets. Our protagonist asked him not to worry. Clenching her fist tightly, Isabel asked him if he had come to fetch her because she had gone to a forbidden street. Alexander smiled and said that that was not the case. Then he asked her why he would be angry at her for that. Isabel asked what he meant. The Emperor looked at her in silence. Quickly, he approached the woman and began to tell her a secret. The truth was that Alexander owned that street. He revealed to her that shortly after ascending the throne, he bought all the businesses there with secret funds, because it was useful for him to have control over the activities that took place there. The Emperor chuckled softly. Without letting go of the woman's shoulders, he said that few people knew that fact, including his secretary, and that he was telling her because she was his empress. And then he gave a broad smile, saying that she knew what that meant. Isabel was stunned by that information. She reflected for a few moments on the relevance of that information. There was no fool in that world who would tell such a great secret to someone he intended to divorce. His confession was a way of telling her that they would never separate. At the same time, it was an expression of how confident he was that this would never happen. Now that she knew his secret, it meant that, whether she wanted to or not, she was even more involved with him. Isabel did not feel well because she thought she had been deceived. That thought deeply irritated her. She never wanted to tell such a tiresome story as that one. Then she asked Caleb if he was determined to keep his opinion. The boy confirmed, saying yes. She saw that he was clenching his hands tightly. The boy lifted his head and gave his final answer to the Empress. Caleb revealed that he still wanted to be her personal escort knight. Isabel told Caleb that it would be good for him to learn more about magic so that he could improve his skills. He asked her if there were many people his age at the Knights Academy. The Empress replied that there were, and that way he could make friends his own age. With tears in his eyes, Caleb begged Isabel not to make him go to the academy. That sudden request left her shocked. The boy explained that he had been harassed by other boys when he was even younger, and because of that he was very afraid of them. She was deeply moved by that confession. Isabel thought it was regrettable that he had experienced something so terrible. Had he already taken revenge on his aggressors as in the original story? Or did he remain a shy boy because he was still very young? Caleb promised that he would be mature and learn many things to make up for it. Isabel was a little hesitant. In the end, she understood. Letting out a sigh, she made her decision. It was not as if there were few guards in the palace, and Caleb could stay with other servants. She planned to keep him for at least a year anyway. The boy quickly stood up. With a big smile, he asked if she really accepted him. Caleb asked if she really would not abandon him. He was very happy to be her personal escort knight. That was the happiest day of his meaningless life. Isabel was satisfied with her decision. She asked him not to call his life meaningless. The Empress told him that no existence in that world was meaningless. There was always something very valuable in every kind of life. Caleb looked at her with his deep eyes. He promised to be more careful with his words. Very well. Now that he had understood that, she turned to him, curious to know if he would like to tell her anything else. Isabel asked the boy, what was the problem? The protagonist heard him make an oath that he would dedicate his life to her, and that if he had anything, he would give it to her. Caleb knelt down and gently took Isabel's foot. He began to kiss the Empress's foot. A little startled, Isabel asked what he was doing. With puppy eyes, he replied that he felt obliged to please her at all times. Isabel asked him not to kneel before her anymore because he would dirty the clothes she had given him. Later, on the other side of the palace, in the royal office, Alexander seemed a little annoyed. His gaze showed a bit of anger. The Emperor was writing some papers. That little boy. Caleb had been an eyesore to the Emperor. Did he really need to cling so closely to Isabel? He was not helping anyone as a knight. That irritated Alexander greatly. The Emperor tried to reconsider. Since it was his wife's decision, and she probably had a good reason for doing that, he could not allow anything to affect his relationship with her, no matter how much the boy bothered him. After all, as Emperor, he had no reason to be upset over such trivial matters. Besides that, he needed to worry about the long list of embarrassing things Isabel had bought on Rue de la Mancha. Those purchases bothered him far more. It was not normal for an empress to spend money on that forbidden street, and because of that, the people were not taking it very well. Some nobles were demanding from him an appropriate explanation and a law to prevent it. Moreover, for Alexander, it would be difficult to find all the people who had seen the empress that day and ask them to keep silent. However, compared to that, this did not seem so difficult. Apparently, Isabel had bought extremely inappropriate things. He remembered that she kept them in a compartment reserved for the empress. They were items so compromising that she kept them stored away in drawers. Alexander remembered that his wife was quite a strategist, so there must have been a reason. He thought that if it were someone else, perhaps she would be interested in spending a night with him. But when it came to Isabel, that certainly could not be the case, since she always refused to see him and said she wanted a divorce. Alexander leaned back in his chair. The emperor did not want to make any hasty decisions. It would be better to simply go and ask her. He walked through the corridors of the palace. As he walked, he thought about many things. If Isabel really wanted to spend a night with him, then but what could he do? In his presence, the empress was always irritated and impatient. Alexander remembered several moments. On the night he tried to kiss her, she became furious. All of that was very strange to him. Unplanned moments moved like gears. Theoretically, they should have bothered Alexander, but the truth was that he was not bothered at all. Thinking about that, Alexander gave a shy smile. He decided to approach cautiously as he knocked on her door. However, from the empress's room, he began to hear some voices. It was Caleb's voice, saying questionable things. The boy was saying that he was grateful to stay by her side and serve her, and that he did not want to accept the expensive clothes she was offering. Isabel asked if he truly would not accept them. She had bought all those clothes for him, and no one else would wear them. Alexander became quite irritated. It was the middle of the night, so why were they talking in her room as if they were very intimate? To him, it was absurd that Isabel refused all of his gifts, but bought expensive clothes for Caleb. He decided to open the doors abruptly. Isabel asked what Alexander had come to do there out of nowhere. The emperor held firmly onto the doors of his wife's room. He apologized for intruding on their conversation, but he could not help being curious about that situation. What kind of knight stays in the empress's room in the middle of the night? The three of them stared at one another, confused. Isabel asked what he meant. He himself had barged into her room out of nowhere. Caleb knelt on the floor and begged the emperor for forgiveness. He explained that the fault was not the empress's, because since she had sent gifts, he had been summoned. The protagonist placed her hand in front of the boy, making him stop speaking. In front of the emperor, she asked the boy to stand up. Alexander became furious upon hearing his wife say that the boy did not need to apologize. He clenched his fist tightly. Isabel asked her husband whether she could not reward her subordinate for his loyalty. She also asked whether he truly thought she would be betraying him. The last time they spoke about that subject, she had made it very clear that it was not true. Alexander replied that he did not suspect her, but he had his doubts as to whether that boy knew his place. Isabel revealed that she was the one who had called Caleb, and not the other way around. The two of them stared at each other in silence for a few moments. The emperor wondered why he was acting that way, since he should avoid making any allegation that could harm his relationship with Isabel. Alexander fidgeted his fingers impatiently. Isabel grew curious to know what he would say. He was distant in his thoughts. The emperor wondered why he acted so impulsively when he was near her. Then he called Caleb and asked the boy to leave the empress's room. Caleb left, and the two of them were left alone. The night went on. The boy remained outside in silence. He swung his feet anxiously and turned to look back. In Isabel's room, our protagonist and her husband stared at each other without uttering a word. Alexander looked at her with his deep golden eyes. Isabel asked him not to expect her to feel better while he continued to stare at her expressionlessly like that. He asked what she meant. She replied that he had certainly appeared in her room with some purpose. The protagonist said that since he had said some things to her, he was probably analyzing how to act next. Alexander completely changed his expression. Then he told her that the smarter she became, the greedier he would become. Then Isabel suggested that he watch her more properly. She decided to give him some advice. From then on, it would be better for him not to do anything that might displease others. Alexander was taken aback by her words. He laughed and asked her whether an emperor should pay attention to others. He also asked her what he could do to make someone else happy. Alexander walked toward Isabel, saying that he was very curious to know. With a wave of her hand, she asks him to forget the idea of making agreements and simply divorce her. He tells her that it is truly a shame. Gently taking her hand, he declares that he could not do that. He leans in to kiss his wife's hand. Then the emperor confesses that he would rather hear her asking to kiss his feet, because that would be easier than them separating. Isabel was left speechless, her cheeks deeply flushed. She replied that that joke was not funny. Our protagonist truly did not think that way. Isabel says that he was very conceited. She also said that he did not care about her at all. Alexander moved closer to her. The emperor asked whether she truly thought that way. Quickly, he extended his arm. Isabel did not understand what he was about to do. Alexander grabbed his wife by the waist, pulling her closer. Laying her down on the bed, he says that she does not know what he would be capable of doing to have her there with him. She looked at him in shock. Alexander looked at her with great affection. The emperor was on top of her, the two of them staring at each other, a little confused. He revealed that she was impressive to him. Holding a lock of her hair, Alexander says that he can finally show his sincerity to her. He gives a soft kiss to her hair. Isabel became very upset. Either he was crazy or things were going far too fast. Alexander gave her a mischievous smile. Our protagonist began calling him by name while he held her face. Quickly, their faces drew closer. Their mouths came very close. Isabel and Alexander kissed. Wow, finally. He closed his eyes, enjoying the moment. But unlike him, Isabel was not on the same wavelength. She looked for something nearby and managed to touch a pillow. Suddenly, that night took a completely unexpected turn. The emperor's face turned red. Breathless, Isabel pulled away from him. With a furious expression, she ordered him to get out of her room. He still did not seem to understand, so she repeated it several more times. The truth is that our protagonist seemed very frightened after that kiss. Despite her trembling hands, Isabel held the pillow firmly. Alexander apologized to her. As he left her room, he thought about how irrational he had been to do that. In addition to having gotten angry in front of her, he remembered her slightly startled expression. The emperor walked silently through the palace courtyard, thinking he could not understand why he had acted that way. Alexander was determined to resolve this at any cost. He could not ask for what he wanted, especially because he was frightened. The emperor told himself that he must have gone mad. At a moment like that, how could he be thinking about her lips? The effect of that kiss was far too intense for him. If he crossed the line, he stopped and thought for a moment. After all, it was normal to feel that kind of pleasure when kissing someone of the opposite sex, was it not? Apparently, only Isabel made him feel that way, which was even stranger on his part. He had gotten angry seeing her talking to the boy in the middle of the night in her room. Given the kind of relationship they had, it was normal for concubines to be accepted in the empire, so it was not something strange in a royal marriage. Besides, it was something written into the marriage documents. So Isabel calling Caleb or several other men should not have bothered him so much, but he was furious. What could be the reason for that? What could be troubling the emperor so deeply? Did he want a different kind of relationship with Isabel? Far beyond the alliance formed by their marriage, he desired a closer and more intimate relationship, a bond far more special than mere formality. He tried to content himself with that thought. Alexander desired Isabel intensely. She pleased him greatly. The emperor wished to walk by her side, and he also wished to help her with things beyond mere duties. As he walked through the courtyard, he convinced himself to stop thinking about that kiss. Insisting on that feeling would not help him at all. Everything was very strange to him. There were experiences impossible to forget. A pillow flew through the room. More and more pillows were thrown into the air. One of them landed right on Isabel's face. She stood there for a few moments with the pillow on her face. Gripping it tightly, she trembled and began to scream, muffled by the pillow. Our protagonist kicked her legs. Getting up, she thought that she must have gone mad. Isabel wondered why she had kissed that man. She knew that he had grabbed her first. However, after a while, she had liked it and returned the kiss. Our protagonist's ego was deeply wounded. Isabel desperately wished that her husband did not kiss so well. Lying back down on the bed, she decided to drop the matter. She was still shattered from the night before and had no energy even to go shopping, and thought it would be better to stay in her room. From outside, she heard some noises of people approaching. She got up, curious to know what was happening. One of her maids quickly entered her room, calling for the empress. Isabel asked what was the reason for so much noise. She said that she wanted to spend the day alone and asked the girl to come back later. The young woman apologized but explained that she had to tell her something. She revealed to Isabel that the emperor wished to see her immediately. Our protagonist thought that he must be crazy, because how could he summon her after what he did last night? Isabel asked the girl to tell him that the empress was ill and could not go see him, but the girl insisted that it was urgent. That insistence from Alexander was very irritating. All she wanted was to ignore him. However, Isabel did not want to put the maid in a difficult situation. Besides, she was curious. Isabel wanted to know what his intentions were, and asked her to inform him that she would arrive in 30 minutes. Sometime later, Alexander said that Isabel had come faster than he had imagined. He could even have waited longer. Isabel had gone to the royal office wearing the same nightgown and with her hair disheveled. What could be so important that the emperor needed to talk to her? And that's all for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the story. What are you thinking so far? I honestly hope Alexander manages to understand the feelings he harbors for our protagonist. It seems so cute. Who do you think is plotting something? Do you think Isabel will manage to get the divorce? Or will she change her mind and new events will unfold? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want more, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any new videos I post. The name of this work is Divorcing My Tyrant Husband, and our recap covered up to chapter 30. Kisses, and see you next time.